convene this Tuesday, November 28th, 2017 Board of Health meeting. This is the Board of Health meeting. It'll be followed by a Board of County Commissioners meeting. We have a number of items on today's agenda for the Board of Health meeting, most of which is a presentation or report, a semi-annual Board of Health report. We do have public comment on both the Board of Health meeting today and on the regular board meeting today, which the regular board meeting is going to begin sometime around 10 o'clock, not a time certain. However, public comment, general public comment will be entertained during the Board of Health public comment period also. So you'll have two opportunities to speak. You'll have one chance to speak, but two opportunities to use that chance. One will be during the Board of Health, and the second will be during the regular board meeting, which will commence subsequent to the Board of Health meeting. So, Mr. Mokrahajski, we have adjustments to the agenda this morning, other than the one that I just stated?
No, we do not.
Very well. Then we'll move into the public comment session then. Once again, this is the Board of Health public comment session, but we will be entertaining general public comment during this public comment session. We allow 3 minutes to speak. At the end of 3 minutes, you'll hear a signal, a beep. At that point, since we do have a packed agenda, I'll ask you to conclude the sentence that you've begun once you hear the signal, which is a signal that your 3 minutes is up. If you do speak in the Board of Health meeting, you can still certainly speak in the regular board meeting. However, it needs to be on a different subject. So just one subject per day. So with that, I do have 11 people signed up for public comment this morning. And bear with me just 1 second. I'll call your name and the name of the next speaker. When you're called to the podium, please state your name and address for purposes of the record. And at that point, the timer will begin, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. So I'm getting the timer ready. So the first person is Richard Sedlock, followed by Beth Poole. Mr. Sedlock.
Richard, Beth, and Jerry will wait until the regular.
Thank you. The first three. Thank you. Then the fourth person signed up, which will be the first person to speak to the Board of Health. The opportunity to speak to the Board of Health is Dave Freeman, followed by Garrett Town.
That's Doug Freeman, and I'll wait until the regular meeting.
Doug, very well. And then Garrett Town, followed by Mike Thomas. Mr. Town, would you step to the mic, state your name and address for the purpose of record, and you'll be allowed 3 minutes. Thank you.
All right. My name is Garrett Town, and I'm trying to raise a family on the property adjacent to the former Peterson property in Dexter that just got foreclosed upon. There was an article in the Register Guard about it. At first, I was reluctant to come here and speak out of fear of making enemies with unstable people, but at 2 a.m. last night, while listening to my neighbors revving motors, it occurred to me that meth addicts, especially those who rev motors all night long, won't likely attend this meeting. I was extremely hopeful when I heard that the county foreclosed on the Peterson property, but very surprised when I heard that the foreclosure might be reversed because somehow health issues are an excuse not to pay property taxes. James Peterson's son was able-bodied enough to regularly visit the property and fill it with tenants that think it is an RV park with a great motorcycle track and firing range, but somehow he was unable to take a check to the county. For example, a week after a drug bust on the property last year, I found that my driveway had been barricaded by cattle gates. I assumed they thought that I was the one who contacted law enforcement, and it was probably meant to be some sort of retribution. We live in the forest, so that's a pretty bold move to mess around on somebody's property in the middle of the night. I confronted the driver of a car that was parked at the bottom of my property and asked him if he knew who blocked my driveway. He told me that he lived on the far side of the property, but there was a bunch of shady people living on the other side of the property, and it was probably one of them that did it. Nobody should be living on the property. It's not residential. If the county isn't able to foreclose, this property will become a code enforcement nightmare and an environmental disaster that will adversely affect the community and tax the county's resources. If laws, decency, and common sense business practices don't motivate the Petersons, I don't know what will.
Thank you, Mr. Town. The next speaker is Mike Thomas, who will be followed by Jerry Finnegan.
Mike Thomas, I'd like to defer to the
Thank you. Then Jerry Finnegan, followed by John Hagen.
Good morning. Jerry Finnegan, 1250 Irvington Drive, Santa Clara.
Eugene. I'm speaking actually to the regular meeting, but I'm not going to be able to stay around. So this is in regard to the pilot program for the homelessness. I can report that Santa Clara Community Organization, which I chair, is in support of finding a community solution to the homeless problem, though there are a lot of issues that surround that. And on a personal note, I would like to say that if the pilot program goes forward, one of the caveats is that there's going to be a evaluation at the end, and I think it's important that the evaluation include things like demographics in terms of who is being serviced, and also maybe even some anecdotal kinds of records about what these people, who these people are, and what these people are doing during the day or whatever, because there seems to be a lot of concern about that. But outside of that, I am supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finnegan. Next is John Hagen, followed by Ann Mulholland.
Good morning. I'm John Hagen. I live on Hunsacker Lane, and I'm against the homeless camp in Santa Clara area. Right now, they're kind of camping under the bridge on where Beltline goes over River Road. You know, there's a lot of girls that come out of the high school that walk by there, and I drive by there a lot. And I've witnessed them hassling the girls, and it's really not a good deal. I've had homeless people on my property. I can't count them on one hand. And I've ran them off, and they seem to like to cut the branches off my fir trees, which, the last person that was there. So who do you think you are can cut, my branches off my tree that I planted? Oh, well, I thought this was city property. So apparently he thinks it's okay to destroy city property. And I don't know if you've noticed, but out there on 99 in Barger, I think it is, there's a great big fir tree that the guy's living in the tree. Apparently it's okay for him to destroy city property or county property, whatever it is. But you really need to do something about the homeless people and not reward them with a camp. It's just, I don't understand, I don't have the money to support them. You guys just got a raise. Maybe you could support them, $9,000 a piece, that's $45,000. You could probably buy a piece of property and fence it. You want to help the community. There's one right across the street that's fenced, Why don't you use it? You're not using it for anything. So anyway, I'm against the homeless in Santa Clara. Why don't you put them in the Whitaker with the rest of the camps? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hagen. Ann Mulholland, followed by Betty Grant. Is Ms. Mulholland in there? Okay.
Is this the health comment period? I'm sorry,
I'll restate what I stated earlier, that if this is the Board of Health meeting, which we are allowing general comment, including what would be normally taken during the regular Board of Commissioners meeting. There'll also be a period for general comment during the regular board meeting, which will follow the Board of Health meeting. So we'll skip Ann Mulholland, put her forward.
you may want to testify later then.
So Betty Grant, and Ms. Grant, would you state your name and address for the record?
Sure. Good morning, Commissioners, city staff. My name is Betty Grant. I live at 840 Jackson Street in Eugene. I am speaking in regards to the proposed pilot program for homeless car camping in that. It's been about 9 months since Ann Mulholland and I first sat down with county land management staff to begin our inquiry into regulations on county land within and without of urban growth boundaries. As a common citizen, it has been a pleasure to be treated with respect and to be given access to our governmental system. I have also appreciated getting to know the workings of the commission, and in particular interacting and getting to know better Commissioner Bosevich and Commissioner Farr. Of course, to be honest, there's also been a lot of frustrations. Although I believe the commissioners will vote this morning to begin a pilot program on car camping in Santa Clara and River Road, this proposed program has been whittled down repeatedly over the last few months from the initial request that car camping on county land be allowed within the urban growth boundaries of all of Eugene and Springfield. Honestly, I've not been able to keep up with the continued narrowing focus, and I'm not certain what the commissioners are facing for a vote this morning. What I encourage is that the proposed car camping program in Santa Clara and the River Road not be further restricted by the number of sites or the number of participants. If the concern is an explosion of car camping sites and the related financial costs, the commissioners simply have to look at the experience of Springfield and Eugene. There has been no such explosion. Keith Heath, car camping manager at St. Vincent de Paul, has to work long and hard to locate each additional car camping site. Those of us outreaching to churches and businesses in Santa Clara and River Road have found the same to be true. It is a long road from the initial expressed interest to the actual commitment to host a car camping site. And now, with repeated delays in the commission's moving forward with this vote, we have entered a particularly difficult season to ask churches and even businesses to begin a new serious commitment. I expect limited success in locating sites at this particular time of year, headed into the holiday season. Churches are extremely busy, and businesses as well. As to the cost, I understand that St. Vincent de Paul is currently running in the red with their management of car camping sites in Eugene. Still, they continue to move forward with management and expansion because this is their mission. The car camping program gives people a hand up from living on the streets, gives them warmth, security, and support to take the steps needed to acquire stable housing. If the commission adds restrictions to sites or participants, it is an unnecessary complication to evaluation and expansion of this program in the future. Was that the 3-minute timer?
That was the 3 minutes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. And Ms. Grant was the last person that I have signed up. Anyone wishing to speak to the Board of Health can do so subsequent to the Board of County Commissioners meeting. The next meeting will begin once again immediately following this meeting. I understand we do have more signatories for this the first session. Thank you. I've been on the list with 5 more folks, and once again, you will have an opportunity to speak either now or during the regular board meeting, which will commence sometime around 10 o'clock. So I have 5 more people signed up. The first is Michael Morris, followed by Linda Mulbank, and please, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Michael Morris. I live out in Dexter also, and this is in regard to the former Peterson property. And I just wanted to piggyback on what Mr. Town was saying. We've lived there probably going on 12 years, 13 years, something like that. And it's a really nice piece of property and everything like that. But when Mr. Peterson took over the property, the business that he planned for there never panned out, so he started going through other ways of making money for the property and stuff like that, which has brought a really bad element to the property. Gunfire is a regular occurrence. Revving of motors at all hours of the morning is a regular occurrence. Explosions, not just fireworks, but explosions are a regular occurrence there. And it should be a really nice, quiet country neighborhood, but with all that's going on and the element that's over there and the campers, multiple motor homes, tents, all that kind of stuff, that's really something that should not be going on. And we're hoping that the county will either auction it off or hold on to it, because it does have nice steel buildings, be great for equipment storage and all that kind of thing. It's a nice big piece of property as well. We also have the easement that goes from Dexter Road out to the Peterson property, and we've asked people to drive slowly on there. I've even bought speed bumps locally to put on the gravel road. So, you know, we're doing our own expense here to try to keep traffic to a dull roar and stuff like that, and it keeps going on and on and on. So I do have a printout from our attorney that kind of goes over the whole thing. She was supposed to have emailed it to the board. I don't know if they did or not, but would you like can I give you a copy of it? Or
You can leave a copy on the table there, and it'll be distributed to the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Linda Once again, Linda Mulbank, followed by Lee DeVay. Linda? Okay.
Good morning. My name is Linda Millard. I live in the Santa Clara area, 4166 Fieldstone Court, and I am quite concerned about the homeless people being able to come and live in my front yard or backyard or any place on the block. We have children that live in the area. We have very young children. We have teenagers, and it is concerning that homeless people that we don't have any knowledge of what they've done in their life, if they are safe people to be around or for our children to be around. I'm even worried about my pet because I have been warned by people in the Fred Meyer area, which is down the Santa Clara Fred Meyers, that people have been stealing pets out of the backyard, and selling them for medical research. This is just, the whole scenario is very, very poor. I'm kind of speaking off the top of my head. I hope that I convey the fact that I really feel that this is very hazardous. My husband is handicapped. He has been quite ill for some time. He has a pacemaker. He has heart problems. He walks around with a walker. We have oxygen in the house. What if people are smoking? I don't know how close you can be to an oxygen tank before it's dangerous. Anyway, I really would like this not to happen because of the concern for our safety. We have locks on our front door and our back door and a security system, but we also have sliding glass doors. We do not set the security system in the middle of the night because it has motion detectors inside. So if we get up to use a restroom, we'll set off our own alarm. So if somebody's going to break in, they would set it off, but I don't want to set it off myself. I thank you very much. I can't think of anything else right offhand to say, except for I really, really oppose this action and hope to heck that you see and understand my position. And I feel that there's a lot of people in the neighborhood that are not aware of this action at all and will be surprised. One other thing is, what about sanitary conditions? What about the destruction of our property with people there? I thank you very much for this time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Millard. Next is Lee DeVay, followed by Mike Mcfadden.
Good morning. My name is Lee DeVoe. I live in Eugene on Pearl Street, and I'm here to speak in favor of the pilot program for the expansion of car camping onto county properties, not county public properties, but just properties located within the county. And listening to people who are opposed to the program, I understand that there's a lot of fear and a lot of concern, and also an acknowledgement that there are a lot of unhoused homeless people already living all over the county and under bridges and sneaking onto private property. And this is actually a solution to part of this. This is setting up legal, monitored camping sites. And of course, if there are problems, and like if there was a problem with any neighbor, the police are called and asked to investigate. I really think that this is the beginning of an answer to public safety and health concerns, and that to address the woman who just spoke, part of this program is that sanitation is going to be provided. So people will have toilets. People will have garbage pickup. So I'm, really strongly encourage you to try this program. It's been in Eugene for a long time. It's been very successful. What we need is affordable housing, low-income housing, housing first programs. But until we're actually able to put those programs in place, we need some emergency programs, and that's what this is. And it is something that will help the community, not harm it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. DeVoe. Next is Mike Mcfadden, followed by Wayne Martin.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Mike Mcfadden from Eugene, and I'd just like to quickly offer my support in favor of the pilot program you're going to be considering in the Santa Clara River Road neighborhood. And to begin, like to echo a lot of what the previous speaker just said. I think that the details of this pilot program really do address a lot of the safety and sanitation concerns. And just generally, I think that, fear and worry about homeless people generally is misplaced, because there are a lot of socially maladaptive things that people do from all walks of life, whether or not they're homeless. There are people who, run drug houses, and so no one wants a drug home in their neighborhood with a bunch of drug traffickers coming in and out. But certain individuals doing those kind of things may or may not be homeless or engaged in those kind of activities. And, on the other hand, as your, health department staff could tell you more about, adverse childhood experiences, addiction disorders, poverty generally, all have, very expensive, very detrimental outcomes on people's health. So, why should we care about that? Not just because it's people that we're talking about, because in the long run, socially, we're all going to end up having to, pay more if we don't address these issues upstream. So I support this because it's trying to do that. I was a foster kid who was failed by, this state government's foster care system, and aged out into being homeless. And so, a lot of the folks out there who, want to look down on homeless people should think about how they can step up to prevent homelessness from happening. So many people are just, have a few $100s in a savings account and can't weather any kind of health emergency or family disaster, and so having a vehicle to move into is oftentimes one of the most fundamental stopgap measures a person can use to keep from becoming truly homeless out on the street under a bridge. And in my case, that was the case, and so, not all homeless people are like It the Clown going to come out from under the gutter and grab somebody's kid, or, property crime generally, drug addiction is a real issue, and there is a need nationwide to address that. And, that is a separate issue from homelessness. And there's a lot of really interesting, cutting edge legal stuff happening where it's, actually looking like it will soon become illegal for government jurisdictions to punish people for their addictions, rather than, provide them medical treatment, which is what they truly need. So I applaud this pilot program, and I'm in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McFadden. Wayne Martin, and Mr. Martin is the last person we have signed up this morning.
Good morning. I just noticed that Ann Milholland is here, so she was the one that you called earlier. Mm-hmm. Good morning. My name is Wayne Martin. My address is 931 Taylor Street in the Jefferson West District. I want to thank you for this opportunity to hold hearings on the subject of the pilot program that you're considering. I think it's a really important and necessary measure that you're taking. A long time ago, at the end of the Civil War, President Nixon, isn't that odd that I said that? President Abraham Lincoln, is there a difference? In his second inaugural address, ended with the words, "With malice toward none, with charity toward all, with each man seeking to do the right as God gives him to see the right." And I'm struck all the time by that word charity that he used. It comes from the Greek word karitas, which means a kind of loving and engaging sympathy. You're in a position where you can put charity at the top of your priorities in the way you govern. Years from now, perhaps long after you're gone, you may best be remembered not for the institutionalized actions that you took, but in certain cases for the charity which you exhibited. We have a crunching social problem with this many homeless as we have in a growing number. So my petition to you...
That's not the signal.
My petition to you would be that you put charity and goodness at the top layer of your thinking as you search for places in the county and advocate the city as well to find places where they can have small encampments, car camping, and other modifications and modules of camping with incentives to people to provide that land that could be used for such a purpose, and offer St. Vinny's an opportunity to have some supervision over all these models that you could consider. I'll present one to you by email by the end of the week that I'd like you to consider that I offered 2 years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. This concludes the Board of Health public comment session. There will be a second public comment session during the regular Board of County Commissioners meeting, which will commence after the Board of Health meeting is completed. Thank you for your comments this morning. Before I ask for a commissioner response or remonstrances, I'd like to say thank you to the Health Department staff who are here for a 9 o'clock meeting, and thank you for indulging me in allowing public comments prior to your meeting, prior to the Board of Health agenda this morning. Thank you. To the Board of County Commissioners, response or remonstrances? I see none at this point in time. Then we'll move forward with the Board of Health meeting. Emergency business. Mr. Mcfadden, any emergency business for the Board of Health?
No, we have none.
Seeing none to the board, I see none. Then we'll move forward with item 5, Health and Human Services, a report, the semi-annual report, Board of Health report. And today we have Director Karen Gaffney and staff. Ms. Gaffney, would you introduce your panel, and Mr. Mcfadden? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll turn it over to Ms. Gaffney to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair Farr and Commissioners. It was actually an honor to be able to sit through the public comment today, and we certainly will be back in the regular meeting to talk some about the pilot project. I think it's appropriate that as you convene as the Board of Health in your role really to assess health-related needs in the community and look at plans and solutions to address those needs that you hear from the community as part of that process. This morning is our semi-annual report. By manual, you ask the Health Department to report to you twice each year on issues that are happening in health and human services and the state of health in the community. So today we have Dr. Pat Ledke, our Senior Health Officer, and Brian Johnson, our Epidemiologist in Public Health, who have a presentation specific to material that's in the cover memo in your packet related to our life course focus. You might remember when we were here 6 months ago, we talked about early childhood, and so we're moving to the the middle age range today to focus on health issues there, and we'll leave plenty of time for question and discussion. The rest of your packet contains updates on each of the 10 divisions that are in Health and Human Services, so we're happy to answer questions about any of those areas as well. But if it works for you, we'll start with the presentation first.
Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. To the board, we'll start with the presentation. And any questions prior to the presentation? I see none. Thank you.
It's been some time since we've started with a poem, Chair Farr, Commissioners. So I thought maybe we would do that. I have a copy here for County Administrator and one for Brian. Would you give each of the Commissioners one? So poem is titled November Late in the Day, and I think it captures our senses, as Karen said, the life course focus moving through the stages of life, and this is the second in our series of doing that. And this poem I chose a few weeks ago, and little did I know that I'd be recovering from a cold and feeling a bit old myself. But such is that, that we'll proceed with that as a preamble. November Late in the Day by John Ridlin. So this is aging, the bare sun, skinned, palely bucking the dark wind, slides through the glass, crawls on the carpet, climbs the footboard, lies crosswise on the blanket, a spoiled dog waiting to be fed. Not now, dear warmth. The kindlings in the shed too far to fetch. Those two great logs that close together to make fire repose apart, an odd couple reminiscing on conflagrations they're now missing. So that's our preamble to move into the life course and aging and what happens in late November in our county where things get gray and drizzly. And for some, that's a happy time. For others, it's perhaps a bit of a sad time. And I'm going to start with the causes of death through this age 25 to 44. And Brian's going to continue with some of the health behaviors through 25 through 44, that age group. And first, I want to highlight some of the good things that have happened with work from the BCC and the BOH. First of all, we have had improvements in tobacco use in this county, and it's nice to see less tobacco use across the age course, but more importantly, we're starting to see, and we hope to see more of, some of the long-term downstream effects of less tobacco use. So you'll note in the report that we've had a decrease in cancer over time, and a good many cancers, of course, are linked to tobacco use, not just lung cancer, but many others. We've seen a continued decrease in heart disease, which is really quite interesting because we are an aging population, and heart disease increases as our population ages, and yet we're seeing slow decreases in heart disease as well. In addition, we're seeing decreases in stroke. We're hopeful, and we don't have the data for this yet, but we're hopeful, and it has been seen in other jurisdictions, that as tobacco use decreases, we may see people becoming more active and seeing decreased obesity and increased physical activity. We don't have that data, it's not in the report, but we're hopeful because that has been seen in other jurisdictions. So the big improvement in tobacco use may have long-term downstream positive effects, and we're really hoping to see that. That being said, the 5 big causes of death in this age group, age 25 to 44, are listed in order. First is unintentional injury, which includes motor vehicle accidents. Second is suicide, and you've heard us speak before that our suicide rates are quite high in Lane County, especially compared to the national average. Third is cancer. This is the age group where we start seeing more cancer. The next age group, from 45 to 64, you'll see even more, and we'll cover that in the spring. But this is when we start seeing cancer come up from down in the lower levels of the top 10 up into item number 3. Next is alcohol-induced deaths. Lane County has had for some time a relative high level of alcohol-induced deaths and alcohol behaviors that are not overly healthy, especially heavy drinking and binge drinking. And in this particular age group, it's the number 4 cause of death. And then number 5, as mentioned earlier, is heart disease. And again, we're quite heartened to see that number decrease over time and expect it to continue. I'm going to transition now to Brian and going to talk a bit about marijuana, ethanol, alcohol, and others.
So good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you again today. It's nice to see you all. What I wanted to transition into really is a focus on alcohol and as well as other substances, and primarily because I know the board has recently been visiting that as an area for policy changes, policy improvements that might actually affect health, and I think be good for us to highlight today, particularly because there's a lot of tie-in to, Dr. Lutke just highlighted a number of the leading causes of death, and as it turns out, alcohol and other substances have a connection with nearly every one of those top 5 up there. So I'll just walk you through that really briefly. For example, unintentional injury, which is the leading cause there, has direct tie-ins. As Dr. Leckie mentioned, motor vehicle crashes are one of the leading causes of death there among unintentional injuries, as well as accidental poisonings and overdose, which are in that mix. And so driving under the influence, which is directly related to the car crashes, as well as misuse and abuse of substances, drugs and other substances, is in that mix. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Our second leading cause of death there, suicide, is directly related to, in many cases, complicated by or directly related to the misuse and abuse of alcohol and other substances, especially when used as essentially a self-medicating way of dealing with severe depression or other complications that might be leading to a person's choice to take their life. As well, transitioning into cancer, some cancers are directly related to alcohol misuse, especially chronic abuse of alcohol over time is what we'll see that direct connection with. And then, of course, the fourth one there, alcohol-induced deaths, of course, are all about alcohol. So, and that's extremely important. What I would point out there is that right now we have opioid overdose deaths have surpassed alcohol-induced deaths in the state of Oregon, and in particular in Lane County. And then lastly, heart disease. It's low, the connections are a little more oblique, but they're definitely there. We have the relationships in particular with, for example, diabetes and other chronic conditions which are aggravated and complicated by misuse of alcohol. So it's important that we just keep those in mind, because there are plenty of room and places there for us to create a climate which is more supportive to the healthy use of drugs and alcohol in ways that are risk-reducing, safe, and in particular protect those who are most vulnerable. Misuse or use and underage use by our children, as well as those who might be struggling with addictions and trying to break through those addictions and support themselves and their families and all the impacts that come upon their families.
Mr. Johnson, if I may interject, for anyone following online or live at this point in time, if you go to today's agenda and click on View Item, you can see the charts that Mr. Johnson is talking about. In fact, it goes into a great deal of depth beyond what even the presentation will include. Commissioner Lycan.
Just a quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question. So on the opioid deaths.
Yes.
Are those legally prescribed drugs or illegal, or have you broken those down?
It can be both. And so what has tended to happen, so opioids are a really complex drug. In particular, they might be legally prescribed, but of course there's a lot of complications with the either accidental overdose, meaning a person takes more than they were prescribed or intended to take, or there's also the high potential for addiction, as well as the divergence into the black market and misuse and abuse by others who are not prescribed for. So they're both there.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a complicated issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. The last thing I just want to highlight is also marijuana use. I know we've explored that, and of course, with the recent changes in law, we're starting to monitor more directly about what might be going on in Oregon. We have very preliminary data at this point, so it's obviously a little bit confusing. And in fact, we don't have data for Lane County specifically that's really particularly useful yet. But in Oregon, we're starting to see, we've had a fair amount of use prior, and it is starting to climb, or at least is a little bit stable among some age groups. But we're paying attention to that, and there's good reason to pay attention to that, because we want to make sure that those who are choosing to use have access, but we also want to make sure that we're taking appropriate steps to make sure we're protecting those who are most vulnerable, as I mentioned, those who might be fighting addiction or our children, making sure that they are not unduly exposed when they don't necessarily need to. So. And one point we would put in there is that while there are definitely there are some connections with certain medical benefits from the use of marijuana, we also know that it's not a harm-free drug, and so there's reason to pay attention to and avoid addictions and misuse where possible. So with that, I just want to wrap that back in, just highlighting the fact that in this age group we're talking about right here, there's a lot of potential struggles. It's really starting to set the course for later age chronic conditions with folks which we'll continue to live with later on in life. And of course, our goal would be to make it possible for folks to live longer with shorter amount of time having to struggle with chronic conditions. So, you want to bring it home, Dr. Littke? Is there more?
I think we can go to questions. We built in plenty of time for questions, so we'll proceed with that.
Excellent. Ms. Gaffney, anything?
I think that plenty of time for questions is an excellent idea, and I think I would just underscore again this piece around looking at lifespan, and at each juncture as we come to you as a Board of Health, if you have questions about what we're currently doing or thoughts about ideas you would like us to bring back to you for further discussion, this is a great opportunity to highlight those for staff as well as we move through these semi-annual reports.
Excellent, thank you. And then I'll open the floor to the board for questions. Just very quickly, I'll mention something. I was asked a question last night. Is that what do county commissioners do? And my first response is we also double as the Board of Health. And when we look at the work that we do, and you're talking about statistical deaths and the things that we can do as a Board of Health and as a county staff to address the unnecessary deaths that occur based upon the list that we have in front of us, that is probably the first thing that comes to mind always for me is what do we do as a county commissioner? We are the Board of Health. So I'll open this to the board. Questions? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in whether you're making any specific recommendations, or is this just a report for the benefit of the public and board on the information that you've been gathering?
The purpose today is to give that semi-annual report, a state of health in this area in the community, and a status report on issues that are at play in each of our divisions in the department. So that's the focus today, is that report. But then if there are particular areas of interest, we're happy to bring those back. As Brian mentioned, I know that the issue of alcohol and drugs has been of particular interest to the board, and that's an item we've had a couple work sessions on, and we're scheduling an opportunity to bring back specific recommendations on that. So we will do those separately from today's item, which is really more the report.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. Further questions? Commissioner Bozevich.
Thank you. So I appreciate the comments about the opiate-related deaths and how complicated that issue is, and it's interesting that actually in 2015 was the first year that opiate-related deaths exceeded traffic fatalities in the state of Oregon, and has become actually more of a concern as a public health issue than actual traffic fatalities. I just have to ask this question because it was up on a billboard of all things, and I can't even remember where I saw the billboard, that where they've legalized marijuana, opiate-related deaths are actually lower than states where marijuana is still illegal. Is there any, factual basis for that statement? Anyone can put something up on a billboard that doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of fact behind it, but is there any interrelationship between use of marijuana maybe preventing overuse of opiates or the reverse?
I'll say I personally would need to look into that closer, but I will say that a lot of what's been happening around these billboards in particular is there are very loose correlations that are being cited there without actual causal connections between those two. So meaning by that, essentially they're making claims that really don't have any real logical connection to them. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case here, but I would have strong reason to suspect that's the case. In many cases, the many drugs, they tend to be interrelated in their use and complications. So use of one drug sometimes sets the stage for the use of other potential drugs down the road and actually more complicating issues. So, but definitely that's something, and I don't know if you know more, Dr. Littke, about that specifically. Have you seen the literature on it? Or?
Yeah, I don't think that I know more. I think you said it very well. I only would add that in terms of retail marijuana, recreational marijuana, we're very early in any long-term data gathering. So the states we look to the most, of course, are Colorado and Washington. They preceded us by a year. There is some fairly good data on, for example, hospitalizations of youth for acute psychosis from marijuana use. That increased in Colorado. That's published in peer-reviewed medical journals. But again, it's just a couple years in, and we don't have very good longitudinal data.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Other questions?
I just want to say thank you for mentioning that correlation does not necessarily mean causation. It's something I've had to explain to people that maybe didn't come out of the science background. Observed correlation doesn't always mean causation. I just, it'll be interesting to see as we progress on with this legalization of marijuana, and particularly this particular age group, 25 to 34, because as we see the impact on youth usage of marijuana when brain development is still in process, that's probably where it has the largest negative impact on health. And what do we see from these 25-year-olds that have had a history of youth usage of marijuana, and how that affects their health and well-being through this time period will be interesting to watch over time.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, Dr. Ludke, over the years, you and I have had this little back and forth on the correlation of a strong economy and compared to issues dealing with our health. And I think, as we all know, there's only a handful of counties in the state of Oregon that have what I would call family wage jobs that are at or above the national level. I think the number is 6 total, and Lane's not one of them. And so as I look at this, and now I will say it is nice to see things like heart disease, especially now we haven't gone. You're right. We haven't gone into the next age groups, which will probably have a bit of a change. But I'm looking at some of these issues, and the one that jumps out at me more than any of the other deaths. I mean, the unintentional injury, it's an accident in normal cases, but it's suicide. And that's the one that really jumps out, because this age group of 25 to 44, they're just going into the prime of their life and have decided to check out. And so do you believe that there may be a continued correlation between having a stronger economy, having gainful employment, people who feel better about themselves because they are not only contributing, but also making sure their families are taken care of? And I know I'm probably asking more of an opinion, but also as someone, because we've even had these private conversations, and I know that you have kind of looked into this, and this is something that's important to you as well. And so it's more of an opinion I'm asking for, more than statistics here. But is there a correlation there, or do you not have, or maybe you don't have the stats to really confidently say one way or another?
So I would say a qualified yes, and the qualification would be that there really are two different ways of looking at this data. You can look at individual data, you can look at population level data. And when you look at individual suicides, for example, it may very well be on occasion in someone who has the supposed dream life that every American wants, right? A home, 2 cars, kids through college, etc. And some things set them off. But at a population level, a significant percentage can be linked to whether or not they are living at a certain economic level. So I think at the population level, yes, a qualified yes.
And I appreciate that. And it's while Lane County can only do so much, the economy really, I've always felt the economic expansion really happens at the city level, but the counties can provide such significant support in those areas on economic development in particular, and job creation. We have what we call the video lottery money, the economic development money tools, the support staff that we have in place, just try to support what the cities are trying to, in a sense, trying to grab, if you will, from an economic standpoint. So it's important to me. It's always been important to me, the economic development side of things. And so I appreciate your answer, and it's something that I don't think is I'm hoping that we can change this into more of a positive way. As you know, I use Washington County as a prime example. And the reason why I say that, because in 1980, they didn't even have the median family income that Lane County had in 1980. Think about that for a minute. And they were the fourth largest county, and we were the second largest. It's less than 40 years. We're the fourth, they're the second. And median family incomes, by the way, have done more than flip-flop. I mean, it's been significantly more than in Washington County, and even what's happened in Clackamas County. And because I'm not going to use necessarily Multnomah and Portland, but I'm going to use those two in particular, because that's where we could have been, I think, at one point. And but I still believe, I'm a positive guy, and I think that we should strive for these opportunities that come our way and not turn them away. So I appreciate your answer, and I think that helps me. Thank you.
Of note, we do look very closely at Clackamas County. It's the county with the closest population to us, although they're a bit bigger, and they're also quite a bit wealthier. And the same very close demographics, racial, ethnic makeup. But again, it's one of the variables out there that affects health outcomes is that their GDP per person is quite a bit higher than Lane County.
Thank you, Dr. Ledke.
Thank you, Commissioner Lycan, for that series of questions. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't really add too much to what my fellows up here have expressed. I do appreciate the report. It's important that we know just exactly where our challenges lie. And to me, it's particularly sad when you look at the bulk of these things with self-medication, hopelessness, people wandering through lives without direction, trying to figure out how they find purpose and reason to live. And it's very difficult when alcohol and drugs and other things step into that and become bigger than they should be. So I appreciate your work that you do on behalf of all citizens. It's very, very gratifying. The one bright spot that is in your report is the decline in heart disease. I can remember as a boy that was everybody's fear was heart disease. No family was not touched by heart disease. Now cancer has kind of leapfrogged over that, but in short, thank you for the work that you do. It's very valuable. Thank you for your report. That's very valuable too. We can take away from that and examine these things more closely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. I just have a couple of quick comments, basically, with one question. You know, we, as a county, I think it was maybe 4 years ago, we established a policy of health in all policies. So folks may not know this or realize that every time we have a board order or a discussion at the board level that's going to result in a decision, we have a health implication of that decision. And so really, you do the extra work on virtually every order that comes through the board. Our health department takes a look at it and takes a look to see what is the health implication of a particular policy that we enact or that we could consider enacting. So thank you for that extra work. And I see those reports, and sometimes there's no health impact. But most often, most of the things that we do have some form of health impact. And it includes our policies on transportation. It includes our policies on housing, land use, all of the things that we do, not just contagion and outbreak, and not just some of the other more significant ordinances that we have worked on in the last couple of years. So I just have one question, and that pertains to the fact that I don't think there's anybody in this room who has not had their lives affected adversely by tobacco use. You mentioned that improvements in tobacco use in this county have occurred in the last couple of years as you've been monitoring that. Can you just take a moment or two to elaborate on how have we achieved the improvements in tobacco-related deaths, tobacco-related incidents, and health implications?
I bet Brian and maybe all three of us have something to say in that regard. The efforts to decrease tobacco use typically need to be multifactorial, and there's a good deal of research over literally 50 years showing what could or should be done and what could be effective. And it ranges from restricting areas where tobacco can be used. So some of us are old enough to remember smoking on airplanes, and every restaurant allowed smoking, and then we went to smoking sections, but of course the smoke didn't obey the section and drifted over into the non-smoking section. So that's one broad area of decreasing areas of potential access. Another is age-related issues, so not allowing kids to buy it and having appropriate operations to assess whether vendors are obeying those rules and not selling to 12-year-olds. Another is around the cost of the product itself. Another would be around the marketing and branding of it, so requirements to put the Attorney General's label on "smoking can kill you." There are other more provocative labels that have been put on products. Some countries have done some very interesting labeling, like the UK. If you can see diseased lungs on the package, there's really no name on the tobacco. It's really quite interesting. But I bet Brian has more to say too.
Thank you.
Mostly I would add, I mean, you probably, as Dr. Lutke's throwing out the list of things that are really effective, I'm sure you heard there that these are the things that the board has helped to make possible in our community. And really creating a climate and creating the spaces where people can be smoke-free, where they can choose not to be exposed to smoke if they so choose, and making it possible to increase and improve our enforcement around tobacco use, and those retailers that do sell tobacco, assuring that it's getting sold, to those who are of legal age, and of course, also spending some time around addiction prevention and also helping folks to quit are some energy areas that we have spent our time and energy as a county, and we've invested in the community, and we've set up really a climate that supports people quitting and preventing people from starting in the first place, which I think is extremely important. And Lane County has led that way for a good 20 years or more, so we have a lot to be proud of there, and we're seeing, we're starting to reap the results, and that's good. Of course, we have lots of good work to do, so.
I have to add one more thing, and it's basically the pathophysiology of tobacco use. The burned products of tobacco preferentially hurt the lining of blood vessels, and many of those products end up attacking, it's called the endothelial lining of blood vessels, and it may seem trivial, oh, well, it's a blood vessel, it's fine, it's not the kidney, the liver, the heart, but of course, every one of those organs need the blood vessels to bring them food and oxygen. So tobacco is really sort of an interesting, insidious enemy, because it affects that bloodline, that area that provides all the food and oxygen to heal tissues when they get injured or there's a small viral infection. And that's why it causes so many different types of disease and so many different ways to kill people. It goes through the blood vessels.
Thank you, Dr.
Chair Farr, if I can just add one thing, and I have to say I love doing these presentations with Dr. Lutke, because we get the doctoring side of things and then we get the administrative side of things too. I guess the last piece I would add around the tobacco, obviously all of you know how hard the Board of Health has worked to set clear evidence-based policies, and you've done that work, which is outstanding and sets the stage for us to continue to see that number decrease. There's still a lot of work to be done on the administrative level. The numbers are not where we need them to be yet. So I wanted to assure you, in terms of work that's happening inside Health and Human Services, we continue to have reducing tobacco as one of our 3 strategic goals in our department. And so that means reaching out to our clients who tend to be some of the most vulnerable people who live in Lane County and have higher than average smoking rates, to really meet them where they are and look at cessation efforts. And we have put those in place in all of our clinical settings, where our physicians and nurse practitioners and mental health clinicians are asking people if they smoke, and if they are, referring them to treatment and doing that work, as well as the strong work that our prevention team continues to do in the community to set the stage to make sure that we don't have more young people start smoking. So hopefully we will continue to see those numbers decline.
Thank you for the response to the question. Our efforts as far as smoking and tobacco use are not misplaced, and they're not in vain. And I say that because I don't know of any chronic smoker who either wishes they had never started or wishes they could stop. is something that our efforts as far as smoking are concerned help people to achieve the goals that they state later in life once they become chronic smokers. I wish I hadn't started. I wish I could stop. So that's a part of our efforts. And, not too long ago, I was at a graduation ceremony in Charlottesville, Virginia, and my wife and I went to a restaurant and said, can we sit in the no smoking section? And the wait person pointed to a table and said, I don't think anybody smoked there tonight. So we're doing things a little bit differently here than happens in the home at the University of Virginia, or at least at the time. And once again, not misplaced and not in vain. And just one thing I wanted to mention, you don't look at the health department doesn't look at every single policy. I think the departments actually make a policy statement, and you guys probably glance at it or help them make the policy statement.
Well, and Chair Farr, actually, it's a wonderful opportunity for me to recognize the work that Brian did several years ago when the board adopted the Health in All Policies strategy. Brian was lead on the team that pulled together resources and helped train staff in other departments about how to best do that analysis and set systems in place on our intranet to provide departments the tools to give you that information when you look at policies.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that work. I think that was the time at which I gave you the honorary rank of doctor, as I recall. So I have a couple more of those in my pocket if anybody. So thank you very much for the presentation. Anything else from the board? Then thank you very much. And with nothing further on the agenda for the Board of Health, this Board of Health meeting is adjourned. Give the room a moment to settle down. Thank you. I will now convene this regular November 28, 2017 meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. We have a number of things on our agenda today, including an 11 o'clock time certain. Now, we've discussed the 11 o'clock time certain, and the agreement that we have is that that item will not start prior to 11. We may go a little bit beyond 11 before that item starts. We'll see as the agenda moves forward. So, Mr. Murkowski, to the regular Board of Commissioners meeting, any adjustments to the agenda?
No.
From the board? I see none. Then we'll move forward with our public comment session. The standards remain the same. You will have 3 minutes to make a statement. At the end of 3 minutes, you'll hear an alarm or a sound. At that point, I'll ask you to complete the sentence or short thought that you're engaged in at the time. When you step to the mic, please state your name and your address for the purpose of the record, at which point I will start the 3-minute timer. We have 12, 13, 14, 15 people signed up. A number of folks were here for the first public comment session who have already testified. Those names will not be called again for testimony in the second in the regular Board of County Commissioners public comment session. So the first person is Richard Sedlock, who will be followed by Beth Poole. Mr. Sedlock, please state your name and address for purpose of record.
Richard Sedlock, 78628 Cedar Park Road, Cottage Grove. At the work session on October 31st, Steve Dingle and the commissioners concurred that the county's authority to regulate recreational marijuana is limited to selling only. This is incorrect. Later this morning, I'll forward to you an email from Floyd Prozanski's office, which quotes as follows, the legal counsel for the state of Oregon's Joint Committee on Marijuana Regulation. Senator Prozanski is correct that the counties and cities can regulate more than the selling of marijuana. Such county authority has existed since 2015. This shouldn't surprise you. Well, the county commissioners or relevant staff who were here 2 years ago. November 17th, 2015, a Lane County Planning Commission work session to discuss recreational marijuana regulations. Here are direct quotes from the minutes of that meeting from 2 years ago. At the BCC's direction, staff is pursuing adoption of time, place, and manner regulations for new recreational marijuana uses. Another one. The Board of County Commissioners agreed to proceed with considering new or amended land use regulations for recreational marijuana facilities. State law gives the county the authority to adopt regional regulations for these uses. These uses had previously been identified in this document as production, processing, wholesaling, retailing, and lab testing. Last quote. the new laws allow local jurisdictions to adopt reasonable time, place, manner regulations. Such regulations have withstood legal challenge when it can be demonstrated that they were enacted to serve a legitimate public interest, such as the furtherance of the public's health, safety, and general welfare. Examples of such regulations could include more restrictive setback requirements, noise limitation, odors, etc. This entire report indicates to us that the Board of Commissioners knew it had the authority to regulate all aspects of recreational marijuana 2 years ago, had directed its staff to investigate ways to do so, and then decided to adopt a light touch approach. As you've heard from us several times, we consider the light touch approach to have been woefully unsuccessful. And we understand the attraction of tax revenues from a lucrative new industry, but you've told us of the paltry sum that trickles down to the county coffers. We understand that new regulations may be onerous for county staff, but they don't have to be. Increasing setbacks, for instance, from 100 feet to 1,000 feet is going to involve zero additional work for someone evaluating an LUCS. And we also understand that changes might open you to some legal challenges from marijuana operations that got in under your light touch approach. But if you continue to retain light touch regulations, you'll attract even more applicants, you'll incur even more complaints and problems, and you'll set the stage for potentially volatile interactions involving nearby residents. You have a stated obligation to promote a compatible, safe, rural residential living environment. Please stop telling us that you can't address our concerns. You may not wish to, but you're able to. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Sedlock. Beth Poole, followed by Jerry Settlemyer.
Beth Poole, 78628 Cedar Park Road, Cottage Grove. I have to say that I'm so confused and I have lost trust in your words. As just explained, this is the history of the marijuana grow production in Lane County as we see it. A whole lot of people's time, energy, emotions have been wasted. Ours, Przansky's office, state and county legal counsel. What are we to think? Your light touch approach has proven to be a failure. Commissioner Bosovic, you commented on October 31st that marijuana issues are your #1 complaints among your constituents. The Land Management Office of Lynn County has more stringent regulations. They've told us that they have received 3 serious complaints. 3. The sheet that I'd like to pass out to you is OLCC's tally of marijuana license applications by county as of yesterday. Lane County has 410 applications. Lynn has 58 applications online. So I'd like to pass these out to you. But that is the past. We all need to focus on the future. What are you going to do to tighten the marijuana grow regulations that are near rural residential areas? We want to, you stated on October 31st that you were personally, each of you, personally going to look into, to seek solutions. You had a statewide county association meetings. We'd like to know what you found out there. We would like to know what you are personally and collectively going to do to restore the county's #1 strategic goal, as you stated, a safe, healthy community. You can avoid Measure 49 and zoning concerns by immediately instituting 1,000-foot setbacks within the land use application form for grows. Recently, we were approached by a reporter with questions specifically asking, what can counties do about the number of marijuana complaints, growing complaints? We put her off once to hear from Przansky's office and his legal counsel about what the state has authorized the counties to do. What do we tell her now about Lane and what Lane County Commissioners will do now that you've seen the consequences of your light touch?
Thank you, Ms. Poole. Next is Jerry Settlemeyer, followed by Doug Freeman. Good morning.
Hi, Jerry Settlemeyer, 78578 Cedar Park Road, Cottage Grove. I don't know where to begin. I do have to apologize that I don't understand legalese language as well as some other folks might. But I've recently read the November 17th of 2015 Lane County Planning Commission report. I would encourage you, or request or plead with you to review that. That's a couple of years old. But at that point when I read that, it confirmed that the reason I'm wearing a gray shirt today is that the world looks kind of gray. If this continues the way it sounded like it was going to happen from that Planning Commission meeting. I want to also say that I'm concerned about whether there was some kind of a conclusion after your October 31st work session on this issue. I'm asking for a lot more of you. I'm asking that you really push, and it might be the legal direction, to understand more. And Chairman Farr, you said at the first presentation that I came several months ago that you understood the responsibility and wanted to know the authority. I think there is a lot of question about what authority you have. And I think you, again, I don't understand legalese, so I can't speak to that. The health issues that just were briefly mentioned here are going to expand wildly, because there's already news reports about animals going to veterinarians when they drink the water of the runoff from these plants. We have this huge issue on our street, and the water's running right now. We have a 1-year-old across the street from this big grow. Those parents are very concerned about allowing that child to crawl around in the yard. Please review this issue. And I'm not saying it's the absolute most important issue on your agenda. All of the things that are in your basket are important. But the season's going to change. The horrible issues that we dealt with last summer, most of them will continue. Although I did understand one thing. You can tell them to turn the generator off, because you can tell them that processing stuff doesn't need to happen 24/7. You can limit that. We'll be back. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Settlemeyer. Next is Doug Freeman, followed by Garrett Town.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Doug Freeman. I live at 4162 Hampshire Lane in Santa Clara. I'm here to speak about the pilot program for the homeless in both the River Road and Santa Clara areas. I'd like to emphasize that a number of my neighbors work, and they've asked me to also speak on their behalf because they share my opinion on this. Some of the board may recognize me as the former supervisory appraiser and negotiator for Lane County Public Works. As such, retired a couple of years, enjoying it. I'm used to sitting there, not standing here. As such, I'm a numbers guy. So let's talk about some numbers. General feeling in the entire of Eugene and Lane County has always been compassion versus consequences. We've heard a lot of talk of compassion this morning. We haven't heard a lot of discussion of consequences. I'm going to cite some crime rates. I'm not, for those who may throw slings and arrows in my back here, inferring that the homeless are committing these crimes. But let's look at the areas. Crimerate.com, downtown Springfield, in the last 6 months, 1,000 reported crimes. Bethel-Danabo, 1,000 reported crimes. Ferry Street North and South, 400 each. Downtown Eugene, over 3,000. River Road, 400 to 500. River Road between Beltline and Irvington, 400 or so. Irvington north to where I live in Santa Clara, 70. Interesting article by the Eugene Weekly in June of 2017. They noted that 2% of the population of the city of Eugene is homeless. They noted that 35% of the court cases in 2016 were due to the homeless. Just yesterday in the Eugene Register-Guard, small violation granted, but violations that your citizens are not going to commit. 14 of 15 dog violations by the homeless. Is it reasonable, gentlemen, to conclude that if we, and we're not fixing the problem here, we're dispersing the problem. Is it reasonable to conclude that if we add a legal situation to what is currently illegal out in our area, that there would be a corresponding increase in crime? I think there would be. A number of questions for you as the board to answer. Where are the 24/7 medical services out there? Where are the commercial and industrial jobs for these people to apply for? What kind of availability do we have of police out in that area? Where are the social services out there? I will tell you, my neighbors have zero tolerance for an increase in crime. You want to tell your wife she's got to take a walk in downtown Eugene or take a walk in Santa Clara at night? Which would she prefer? I can tell you what my neighbors will say. Compassion versus consequences. These are your tax-paying citizens out here. You're going to have issues, and your people will be back to talk to you once you make this decision in the affirmative. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Next is Garrett Jones, followed by Mike Thomas. Excuse me, Mr. Town has already spoken. Next is Mike Thomas, followed by Ann Mulholland.
Good morning. Am I close enough to the microphone?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for the counselors allowing me to talk this morning. My name is Mike Thomas. I live on Lindbergh Street in the Santa Clara area. I got my hair cut yesterday. And as I've been going around town the last 2 weeks, I've been mentioning to people, are they aware of this proposal for the Santa Clara area? Very few people are. So as I was sitting in the barber shop yesterday, I mentioned that, and one gentleman who worked at the barber shop said no, he wasn't aware of it. The young lady who was cutting my hair stopped for a moment, and then she walks around in front of me, and she said, I was homeless for 3 years. And I can't believe that this kind of proposal is being considered. It's not wise, she said, to combine with private neighborhoods. She said that she became homeless because of a meth addiction, which I hear over and over in this community. Many, many people who are homeless, it's because of drug issues. The only way she got her life straightened out, what she told me, was when her kids were taken away, and that caused her to reevaluate. And I went to commend, I believe it was Mr. Freeman. I'm struggling here, I should have taken notes. The words he used were compassion has responsibility as well. Last winter, as I walked to the bus stop every morning, I saw some changes in my neighborhood. At the end of my street is a church that, for the first year last year, they housed I believe the Eagan warming centers. And I noticed a drastic change in my neighborhood. From me being harassed, from me being followed home. There were several times where I turned around and I walked back down to the 7-Eleven so I wouldn't be followed home. To fights at the bus stop in the morning, which one morning turned into a fight, including an assault on the bus driver. Now, I'm not saying that happens in all cases, but what I'm saying is that there is nothing in this plan I'm hearing of, nothing for increased community policing, increased public safety. I heard about this plan 2 weeks ago, and thank you to Commissioner Bozovich, I heard about it on the radio as I started telling my neighbors. Nobody knows about this plan in our neighborhood. And I too was asked, can you speak on my behalf? I'm taking time off of work this morning to be here. And I know that a lot of others in my general neighborhood wanted to be here as well. We need to examine this plan closer. We need to think about public safety. We need to think about that. That is an area where you have combined public and city lands. Who's going to respond to that? And I thank you for considering. Please at least consider the private property homeowner issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Mulholland, I placed your name out of order. You'd signed up earlier, so you'll be next after Thomas Natiko. Thomas Natiko, followed by Ann Mulholland. Thomas? Ann Mulholland, followed by Michael Carrigan.
Ann Mulholland, 2685 Benson Lane in Eugene. I'm here to say I am very eager to see the pilot project implemented. There's going to be benefits on many levels. Obviously, one of those benefits is going to be to the 10 households that find legal place to sleep at night and live and go on. The other benefit will be to the community because this is a supervised program. The people who camp sign a contract agreeing to requests of the homeowner or business that is inviting them to stay on their property. I know there's data from the St. Vincent de Paul program with the city of Eugene, where in all the time, these are years that Keith Heath has been supervising, there's been only one time where St. Vincent de Paul couldn't resolve conflicts and actually had to call the police one time in a very large and extensive program. So I'm very eager to see this happen. I'm eager to see the good results from it that's going to come when you review it in a year. I'm eager to see it expand to the rest of the unincorporated land within the city limits, and I'm even eager to see the state okay the land use changes that will allow it to be in the county overall. So thank you very much for your hard work.
Thank you, Ms. Mulholland. Next is Michael Carrigan.
Good morning. My name is Michael Carrigan. I live at 1439 West 4th Ave in Eugene. So on behalf of Community Alliance of Lane County, or CALC, I'm testifying today in favor of establishing the pilot program for overnight homeless camping, parking in the urban transition zone within the urban growth boundary, or the UGB, in the River Road, Santa Clara area. We desperately need safe places for the unhoused to be, and the car camping program will provide that. And with St. Vincent de Paul's involvement in the program, it'll be a safe program for the neighbors as well. St. Vinny's does a great job. CALC has assisted Lane County with the point-in-time homeless count the past few years. We'll be helping this year as well. And our volunteers have counted unhoused folks all over this county. I mean, places just all over. So last year, 1,529 people were counted during the Lane County's 2017 point-in-time count. And in addition, 12,998 individuals who are homeless sought social services through Lane County Human Service Division funded programs during calendar year 2016. And according to the State Department of Ed, 2,156 homeless and precariously housed students attended public school in Lane County during the 2015-16 school year. There's clearly a huge problem, so let's expand the highly effective car camping program to county land. There are areas within the Eugene-Springfield UGB that are outside city limits and in the urban transition zone where churches, businesses, and nonprofits are eager to take part in the car camping program. So I urge you today to support the proposal from county staff that will do just that. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you, Mr. Kerrigan. Mr. Kerrigan was the last person signed up for today's public comment session. If there is anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Board of County Commissioners, please step forward, state your name and address for the purpose of record, and you will have 3 minutes to state your point of view.
Hi, my name is Thomas Watkins. I know some of you already, and I attended your car camping program, and at the advice and the invitation of Mr. Farr, I attended another conference. I also passed out, stated my opinion on what I believe to be, what I'm saying is that I attended the hearings and I attended the meeting the day prior to that. And I've given out, I have some reservations about the car camping program in that Eugene already has a program. This is the urban growth boundary. Have in fact, you county commissioners have in fact applied for the status that's required to have camping. Has that been done?
Ask that question more directly.
With HUD, as Eugene required status with HUD in order to get theirs. Have you guys done that same thing?
I'll respond to that subsequent to your testimony.
I have further, you have my, I've made some requests in there for a response. I would like a response to that. As far as St. Vincent de Paul's and Cahoots, these people haven't been trained yet. And before training, this has to do with Coleman v. Brown. As far as medical, no one's been given that sort of training at this time. So I don't know that they could do the evaluation and the paperwork that's involved prior to that. You heard from the health people on what's going on. They're complying with that same court case. And all I'm asking is consider what you're doing and the ramifications that come from that. As it comes down, I mean, it's going to, by getting car camping in a urban growth boundary, you're creating more lawsuits than you're helping people. And that's what I'd like for your consideration. And also, does Lane County have an agreement with Department of Justice? That's what I'm asking. You have my paperwork. You have what I responded to. I asked that if you could respond back on next door so that all the neighbors can understand what's going on. Is that possible? I would respectfully ask for that.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. If anyone else wishes to address the Board of County Commissioners, you can do so at this time. I see none. I will close the public comment section, and open this up to Commissioners' response to public comments and/or other issues and remonstrances. Bear in mind this the item of the car camping pilot in the urban transition zone will be an item on the agenda with further opportunity for discussion. So public comments, response and/or remonstrances. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chair Farr. Several items. Mr. Sedlock had some prepared statements. I'm hoping that I can get a copy of those concerns addressed by Senator Przanski, and that way I can take a look at those and share them with others, including legal counsel. I appreciate everybody's testimony this morning. We had two significant conversations this morning, one about the marijuana growing issue and its impacts, and then the pilot program for homeless camping. And neither of these are difficult issues or easy issues to deal with. They're very difficult. I appreciate the fact that there was such great decorum in our speakers this morning. The situation with, and I'll be brief, but the situation with the marijuana, I have heard from all areas of my district about the same complaints about marijuana grows. So I really do hope that we follow up with those concerns and direction that Mr. Sedlock proposed through Przansky's office. And on the pilot program for homeless, I've lived in the same neighborhood in Cottage Grove for 35 or so years. When I moved into that neighborhood, all my neighbors were World War II veterans and people that had been through the Great Depression. They're all gone now. The neighborhood has transitioned in the last 35 or so years to a different demographic. And over the years, I've watched it change continuously. One of the things that I've noticed in the last 4 or 5 years is the incredible number of what appear to be vagrants, people without direction, middle of the day, wandering around. Clearly, a number of these have issues with either drug impairment or mental issues, perhaps both. But when I look at what's being proposed in this pilot program, it is a direction that we can look at and see if it works. If it doesn't work, it's a pilot. If it doesn't work, it can be, in my mind, removed. But I think we need to give it a shot. I wish there were something like that in some of the neighborhoods, certainly in my neighborhood, to where these folks that are wandering around aimlessly throughout the day while I'm at work and my, others are at work as well. It would be comforting to me knowing that there were folks concentrated in an area that is monitored, sanitary issues, observation by police and social service organizations. I think that is something that has merit, and I wish that we had something like that in my historic neighborhood, because the transition in the last number of years has been horrendous. There are had a house across the street that was vacant for about a year. Folks actually had removed the back portion of the garage wall, and untold numbers of people were entering and leaving that property daily and at night undercover. This is 3 doors down from me and across the street. Very disconcerting that that kind of activity is going on. If there were opportunities for people to be more closely monitored and meet some of those needs that they have, I would see that as a benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Further remonstrances? Commissioner Eagan, then Commissioner Bozovich, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to all the folks who took their time to come here this morning to testify. And as Commissioner Chair Farr mentioned on the proposal, that'll be up for discussion by the board, and I'll put forth my remarks then. And I think Commissioner Williams touched on the folks from his district, and I really appreciate his comments as well. My remonstrance is going to be on something completely not even here discussed this morning. And what I would like to do is, in the Atlantic magazine, in the new issue that's coming out in December, there is an article in the magazine describing the use of mass wood or advanced or engineered wood products, cross-laminated timber. And as you read through the magazine, you realize that they are really focusing on our state. In fact, the magazine flat out said that Oregon is primed to be not only the national leader, but the world leader in really not only the supply, but the manufacturing of cross-laminated timber and other engineered wood products. And I say this because today, as a matter of fact, Lane County and the city of Springfield are hosting an event, and it's really for our Lane County. I know our very own Sarah Means, who's our economic development manager, will be there in attendance, but they're hosting what's called the Lane County Advanced Wood Products Strategy Session. And I know from my perspective as former mayor and now as Lane County Commissioner, this is something that's been important to me. Our current mayor, Christine Lumberg, this is something she has been such a leader on as well nationally, and I really appreciate her leadership. But this session is taking place today, and as I have found out, we are having major industry leaders from throughout the state that will be here today to discuss about the potential, not only to hear and learn more about it, but to potentially make increased investments so that we could see this type of manufacturing. And if you read into it, what's amazing about it is that they are clearly talking about this, using this as to build tall buildings instead of concrete and steel. It's carbon neutral. And not only that, it's much more earthquake resistant than your concrete and steel buildings, and it's widely used in Europe. I mean, it's widely used there. It has been for the last couple decades. And so it's something that's very important that I think could really help our industry. And in fact, Congresswoman Bonamici tweeted yesterday as she was touring the brand new federal, oh boy, I can't remember what it is. It's a new corporate headquarters for one of the major credit unions. So anyway, they are building their new facility out of cross-laminated timber, and she expressed her support. So it's nice to see a Portland area member of Congress also expressing support for this, as it is what I call it high-tech manufacturing using wood. And so I think there's a real great potential, but it's in the Atlantic magazine. You can find it online, and it's the latest issue. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Likenen. Before we move along, I'll state that we do have three very substantive items that we need to complete before noon on today's agenda. The first of which will be, we have three substantive items plus Commission business prior to that. So we'll move forward with the remonstrances, bearing in mind that we have about 1 hour and 20 minutes to complete our today's agenda. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I'm only going to address the item that we came up in public comment that we're not discussing later, and that's the issue of marijuana and regulation. And I hate to disagree with Senator Prozansky, but Senate Bill 1598, which you all have been provided a copy of, wasn't effective until March of 2016. We had to adopt our marijuana regulations mostly in 2015. Thus being, any action taken under that bill will be under the scrutiny of Measure 49 claims. So there is a very large tension there. So I would be happy to speak with you all offline, but I think you're being told two separate stories when it comes to what you're hearing from that, let alone the fact that we got no opportunity to regulate medical. And that's where the majority of my complaints are, and maybe why you're not seeing them in the our land management department, because they do not and are not allowed to regulate medical grows.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Then I'll just add one very quick item regarding Mr. Settlemeyer. You mentioned that I'd asked regarding our authority and our responsibility. That is a dynamic, the response to that is dynamic. It's changing as we receive more information and consider more outside input. So our responsibility is to abide by what we promised, and that is that Lane County will be a safe and livable county, and our work continues on that. Thank you for bringing it to our attention, and clearly our work is not done surrounding marijuana grows in Lane County. And the other thing I'm just going to mention real quickly, but I'll cover this more in detail later. I spent a large amount of time last night inside the walls of the state penitentiary speaking with men who have long long sentences who have very little opportunity to leave the inside of those walls, and had a chance to talk in depth with their response regarding specifically restorative justice. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. Any further remonstrances? I see none. We will move forward then with emergency business. Mr. Mokahysky, any emergency business?
No, we have none today.
Then item 5 on our agenda today is employee recognition. From time to time, we have stellar service by one of our employees, Mr. Mokahysky.
And today, Mr. Chair, we have stellar service by 2 of our employees, and this is one of the great privileges and one of my favorite activities is to have the opportunity to recognize the great work happening by our employees. So I want to invite our County Clerk, Cheryl Betchart, come on up to the table. I'm not sure if you were told, and our Records Supervisor, Marl Hone, sometimes we dupe these folks and we tell them we're bringing them here for an update to the board. Cheryl is always great about providing elections updates, and I'll invite Greg Rickoff as well, who is the director of the operations department where the clerk and records office resides. And so this is one of the great things that we get to do. We have so many incredible employees in Lane County that are doing outstanding work, and it's really a treat to be able to recognize today 2 of those individuals. So County Clerk Cheryl Betchart and Records Supervisor Marl Hone. This year, County Clerk Cheryl Betchart achieved the Certified County Clerk status from the Oregon Association of County Clerks. And Records Supervisor Marl Hone achieved Certified Recording and Elections Administrator status. As the board knows, the county clerk is charged with administration of mandated requirements for elections, voter registration, recording of documents, issuing of marriage licenses, processing property tax appeals, and archiving of documents. And the certification that these individuals went through requires ongoing commitment to education and training, as well as experience conducting successful elections and records processes. Cheryl has served the past 5 years as elections legislative vice chair, as well as served on various state committees establishing rules and guidelines for election system, state certification testing, and electronic registration cross-state data matching processes. And Cheryl's really active in associations across the state. Many of the county clerks around the state are elected positions. Cheryl is in an appointed capacity, but she serves really in a leadership role and is respected statewide for her great work. Marl has served on the Recording Legislative Committee as well as Recording and Board of Property Tax Appeals panel. So both these individuals really have been leaders in our community and around the state. Additionally, Cheryl has begun the certification process through the Elections Center, which is the national body for elections officials, and that requires taking credit classes over a 3-year period. So both of these individuals, Cheryl and Marl, have demonstrated an unparalleled commitment to excellence and continue to ensure our elections and recording processes comply with all established laws while ensuring integrity for Lane County citizens. We know in Lane County we have a record number of registered voters. We oftentimes don't think about our elections process until it comes up and there's a big election, or if there's a problem. And we have been so blessed with just really smooth, particularly given the large increase in number of registered voters, the changes in technology that have been implemented over the past several years, and just incredible work that both these individuals have done. They continue to ensure that our elections and recording processes comply, and we have high integrity in those systems. So we in Lane County, as the board knows, we've really had a focus in the last couple of years on developing leadership programs and doing workforce development and workforce planning within our organization to make sure that we continue to train the future leaders. And it's just such a treat today to have Cheryl and Marl here, and they really, to me, represent a commitment to our organizational commitment and their individual commitment to ongoing training, development, and excellence, and their outstanding public service is why they're here in front of you today. So we have certificates and want to thank both of you for the great work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ms. Petrart, Mr. Horn, you have 20 minutes each to respond. Thank you. If anyone ever visits either of these offices, you'll notice from time to time they're just like an anthill of activity, and sometimes not. But thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Mokrahysky. We'll then move forward with our business. Is there, let's see, we have before us our consent calendar. The consent calendar will be voted on as one single item. Any item wishing to be removed from the consent, that had been wished to be removed from the consent calendar would have been done so for further discussion. Anyone watching online or following the meeting today can click on today's agenda, click view item, and see all of the materials that have been considered, considered on the consent calendar. So we have before us a consent calendar for November 28th. Commissioner Bozevich.
I'd like to move approval of the November 28, 2017 consent calendar.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Moved by Commissioner Bozevich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Discussion to the motion. I see none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Then we'll move along, Mr. Mokrahysky, to item 7A. Under Health and Human Services, we have before us Order 17-11-2808 in the matter of establishing a pilot program for overnight homeless camping parking in the Urban Transition Zone with the Urban Growth Boundary, UGB, in the River Road, Santa Clara area. And we have Ms. Gaffney again and Mr. Manella, and I'll mention to folks subsequent on today's agenda, we do intend to get through this morning's agenda before noon today. So anyone who may be waiting for subsequent items, including the 11 o'clock time certain, may be moved closer to 11:30 or 12 o'clock. Ms. Gaffney, Mr. Mokrahysky, thank you.
Chair Farr and Commissioners, I'll just very briefly tee this up, and Steve will lead the presentation, and then really our purpose today is to have the discussion with the board. As you know, the community approached the county months ago with the idea of providing the opportunity for participation from businesses and private entities and religious entities in the urban growth boundary to be able to do a program similar to what has been sponsored in the city of Eugene and the city of Springfield. So since that time, we've worked with county council, staff and Public Works and others to craft a proposed pilot project for the board's consideration. And I know when we met with you at the beginning of the month was an opportunity for the commissioners to do some public outreach, to provide an opportunity today for public comment, which we've done. So I think it makes most sense to start this conversation off with Steve reminding the viewing public and the audience what this program is and what it isn't, and setting that stage, and then we're prepared to answer questions from the board as well.
Good morning, Ms. Manella.
Good morning, Commissioner Farr and Board of Commissioners. This is the third time that I've come before you to talk about a potential pilot program for unhoused people to be able to legally camp on certain properties. I think this is a good lesson in civics, as Ms. Gaffney just mentioned. Since we met last, there was a community meeting on November 14th at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, and Commissioner Bozevich was there in attendance, and then Commissioner Farr had a session at North Eugene High School on November 21st. So what I'll summarize for you is the outline of the program, and then I'll say that part of the process has been hearing from the community and refining that proposal. So what we are talking about is a pilot project for homeless camping, and that pilot project would be limited to, and this is something that is referenced in the City of Eugene ordinance, but we would limit it to persons sleeping overnight in a vehicle, camper, or trailer in a parking lot of a religious institution, place of worship, business, or public entity that owns, leases property, or which a parking lot or occupied structure or are located. So one of the refinements that occurred in discussion with the community is that during the pilot period, folks were concerned about the parameters around having people be able to stay on a individual residential property in a driveway or a backyard. And given that with the resources we have to have a supervised program, a program that screens individuals for their criminal history and background, and then provides supervision, our proposal adds a 0.5 FTE to work with Keith Heath, who administers the City of Eugene program. He's already stretched pretty thin. So what you see is a very intensely supervised position with a 10 sites or 10 households being served, some of which will be individuals, some of which will be families with children. And the second point that I want to make is that, again, this is a situation where a portion of the budget goes towards sanitary facilities that are available at each of these sites. So there will be porta potties and also garbage facilities at each of the sites that would be under the program. Additionally, what it is not, and there were some references to the Eagan Warming Center. The Eagan Warming Center is a low threshold, cold weather when temperatures are below freezing. We afford people the opportunity to get in to warmth, to not freeze to death overnight out in the community. And that is a low threshold situation. There is no screening. Anyone is welcome, and so the kind of activity that might be mentioned around the Eagan Center would not be something that one would see under a supervised camping program. And I think some of the concerns that have come forward regarding Eagan are things that my staff will be talking with St. Vincent de Paul about in relationship to the ongoing Eagan program, but it's not the program that's being proposed here. The other example that I heard was the freedom for people to loiter on public property, the example of the Eugene Mall. And again, what's being proposed here doesn't fall under that category, and some of the challenges that come with regulating behavior in a downtown mall kind of situation. So. I'm glad that we've had an opportunity to talk with the community, because I think that that one of the things we've seen over time with a number of projects like this is that that some of the fears that people have, they realize over time that this is a much more regulated, compassionate kind of approach. And one of the speakers spoke of rights and responsibilities, and I think, as has been referred to before, there's a contract that the participant in the program signs. They have rights, but they also have responsibilities in the program. And then there is also an agreement between the property owner and the nonprofit who has been St. Vincent de Paul, who's administered the program, that also outlines rights and responsibilities. So, this is a situation where there is a contract in place. The last point that comes from the City of Eugene's program is an issue around, incompatible kinds of situations. And again, we're looking at this being a, vehicles, campers, trailers, conestogas, at religious institutions, places of worship, business, public entity, so we feel like, those are appropriate sites in the case of either a commercial or industrial business. Many times folks who afford the opportunity for someone to stay in their parking lot will use it as a form of security. The other thing that I'd mention that is nationwide and people see in their lives on a daily basis is the camping that goes on in Walmart parking lots, whereby this is an example of a national corporation that allows this type of usage when it's allowed by local law as well. So one other things that I wanted to mention, we received a comment on the prioritization of the use of our state grant funding for this purpose. And what I would like to do is we will put on our Human Services website, and we'll get to the Board of Commissioners, the lists of projects that are supported with the state funds and the folks that are served. And as one example, we put in place a homeless family diversion program. Serves around 240 families in Lane County, 800 individuals, and this is a program that focuses on working with families and prevention and keeping children from experiencing homelessness. So that's just one example. So this is a $40,000 expenditure for this out of a couple $1 million of state funding that we receive for homelessness, to put it into context. So with that, I'd open it up to any questions or comments that you all may have.
Thank you, Ms. Brunell. And before I open for questions, I'm going to just state a couple of facts, no value judgments, no value statements at this point in time. The first thing is I've been working on homeless camping ordinances since for greater than 20 years now. In 1997, the City of Eugene had its a council committee on homelessness and youth. Now, the point I'd like to make there is that one of the offshoots and one of the subsequent actions by that committee, the three-member committee, was Eugene Ordinance 4.816. So if you look at Eugene Ordinance 4.816, Ms. Manella, some of the things that you've cited just now are direct verbiage from Eugene Ordinance 4.816. And so we are considering, much of the language that we're looking at is taken from the Eugene Ordinance, but not all of it, because the Eugene Ordinance has some things that we would not consider in this pilot program. So some of the things that do come from the ordinance is, as you mentioned, persons may sleep overnight in a vehicle, camper, or trailer in a parking lot of a religious institution, place of worship, business or public entity that owns or leases property, etc. Now, paragraph B of that portion of the ordinance talks about backyard camping and driveway camping and vacant lot camping. You have been specifically asked to remove backyard, vacant lot, and driveway camping from our consideration for the pilot project. Mm-hmm. So as we move forward, my recommendation is that we do not consider the latter three, no matter how we may feel about that this pilot program should move forward with just the religious institution and private business parking lots. The second thing that the Eugene ordinance states is very specifically that the property owner who allows a person or persons to sleep overnight shall make available sanitary facilities, provide garbage disposal, and provide a storage area that's not visible from a public road. All those would be part of the any consideration that we have. And one last thing from Ordinance 4.816 that I'll mention is under 4A, notwithstanding any other provision of this section, and I'll put jurisdiction, it says here city manager, but the jurisdiction or the designee may prohibit overnight sleeping on a property if the jurisdiction finds that such an activity on that property is incompatible with the use of adjacent properties, etc. So there's very strict restrictions on what we're considering for a pilot program. So Ordinance 4.816 is available online. You can go to a number of different places to find 4.816. But one last thing I'm going to say is that we're looking at a maximum of 10 sites for this. Now let's compare that to the other efforts that we have surrounding homelessness. This is tiny. 10 is tiny compared to the other efforts that we already are engaged with, and compared to the existing programs inside of the city of Eugene, and in fact inside the city of Springfield. So 10 sites. Let's compare that to Operation 365, for instance, where we housed 404 homeless veterans in 1 year. Granted, that was not camping, that was more into permanent housing and transitional housing. But our efforts surrounding addressing needs for homeless people to make it legal for people to not have to conduct illegal activity, to camp and to sleep overnight. The efforts that we have surrounding legal camping are broad, deep, and go back decades. This is not a new thing for us. It's not a new thing for the city of Eugene, and it's not something that each of us commissioners does not have occurring in or close to our own backyard. For instance, Bethesda Lutheran Church in my backyard, basically my backyard, does fall inside the city of Eugene's city limits and works with a camping family under that ordinance. We all have that already happening. It's been happening for a long, long time, and Keith Heath from St. Vincent de Paul factually has been working in the program for 12 years addressing the immediate concerns that occur. And during that 12 years, he answered the other night at the town hall at North Eugene High School. In 12 years, he has had to summon the police one time in 12 years in the entire city of Eugene, in the entire city of Eugene's ordinance. These are facts surrounding the discussion that we're having at this point in time. And I'd like to open this for questions and comments. I'll start with Commissioner Bozovich, then Commissioner Sorensen.
So, first I'd like to state that, I think the program that's currently being run in the city of Eugene and Springfield by St. Vincent de Paul is a very successful, low-impact program. And what we're proposing to do is something that's going to be very low cost and low impact. Everything I've looked at, from the amount of complaints and law enforcement response, actually shows there are less complaints about the population that are enrolled in this program than there are about the general public. So, those are all factually, statistically able to document. One of the things that was asked by a constituent, and you've addressed a little bit, was, why don't we just give $40,000 to the Eugene Mission to use as they want? I actually contacted Jack Tripp about that and asked him, what they might be able to do with $40,000 a year. And, he did have some idea of what he might be able to do with it. The problem is the way his institution is set up is he can't accept direct government funding. So that we don't really have the ability to do that. And there were some issues about, would it be a permanent stream because he'd like to hire staff with it? He doesn't like to hire staff unless he knows he's got a relatively permanent revenue stream. And then I also contacted Terry McDonald at St. Vincent about what they could do other than this program. And Terry came back with a pretty interesting note that basically said, your program's less than $350 per site per month. There's no other way to house somebody for that kind of cost. This is probably the lowest cost way of housing a person or family, as the case may be. You know, he said the only thing that comes close is some of the trailer parks that we have taken possession of, where we can get a new trailer on a site, a brand new 2-bedroom trailer for about $40,000. And by the time we get it hooked up and we're paying ground rent and all that, we can rent it for $500 a month to a family. So that's the closest they can come. And that is limited by the amount of trailer parks that are available in Lane County. So it is a great program. That all said, I believe that, personally, I've failed in my outreach on this particular program. I heard at my meeting at St. Matthews, I've heard it on Facebook, I've heard it through email, I've heard it by telephone calls, I've heard it by in-person meetings. The neighborhoods out there, even though this has been in progress since last summer, we actually had citizens come and ask us to look at this last summer, and it's been in the newspaper last August. You know, everything else you would think people know about it, there's still a feeling that nobody knew this was coming in my particular portion of this area, and that there's a great lack of knowledge, and you could even hear some of it from the public testimony today about what is and isn't in the program and what the impacts might be. And I also feel like we kind of promised people back in September, when we thought we were going to actually pass an ordinance, that we were going to hold an official public hearing in the River Road, Santa Clara area. We did hold some public meetings, but because they were unofficial county meetings, they were only able to be advertised by Commissioner Farr for his meeting through his means, and myself for my meeting, even though I was able to get on the radio and I actually paid to promote it on Facebook. There was still, people that heard that afternoon about the meeting that showed up and thought the meeting was about a completely different subject. There is really, I think, from what I'm hearing, both at my meetings, a majority of sentiment against this expansion of this program at this time. And I know a lot of it's because there's a fear of the way that the program was laid out to them, or that they don't understand the program. But the one thing I'm reluctant to do is move forward with something on the basis that I understand it better than my constituents do. There's nothing worse than an elected official looking at people that elected him and saying, oh, you just don't understand, and moving forward with something because you feel they don't have the knowledge. It's my job to give them that knowledge to where they support this. So what I'd like to ask the board to do today is to delay action on this item and authorize staff to do an outreach, to spend the resources to do the necessary outreach and information, and to hold a public hearing either at North Eugene High School or some venue in that area that's well advertised, that we can actually gather general public input on in the evening sometime in the future, because I feel like if we move forward with this, we're going to look like the elected officials that just know better than our constituents to those folks that live out there, and it will do nothing but do damage to our efforts to help folks, because we will not look like we are paying attention to what the voters are telling us.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozievich. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thanks very much. This program that, as I understand it, isn't the Eagan Warming Center program. Is that right, Steve?
Yes.
So when we hear about programs that help people by that are homeless by having them go to some community facility and they're not screened for the various problems they might have, this program, the one that's being suggested and being in front of the board, it's not really an unscreened program. It's a screened program. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And another thing is, in my case, I live 5 or 6 blocks away from a City of Eugene park where this type of program has existed, and I live several blocks from a church and a church parking lot where this program exists. Is this program for the county, the pilot program, is it comparable to the City of Eugene supervised camping program where landowners volunteer their land? Is it comparable?
It's comparable.
How does it differ?
How it differs is that the recommendation for the pilot is to not allow on private residential property, backyard or front yard or driveway camping.
Well, it's more restrictive than the current Eugene program. How does it differ from the Springfield program that's comparable?
It differs from the Springfield program in that there is a permitting process through the City of Springfield in order to establish sites, and the City Council of the City of Springfield has to approve each individual site.
Okay. And that would not be the case in this pilot?
That's not the case that we're recommending in this pilot.
Yeah, okay. Well, you know, it seems like we've been at this for quite a while, and I know that one of the problems we have in setting this up, was it September that you began coming? I'm looking at the advocates now. September. So it's been about 14 months, round numbers. Yeah. I just think that, first of all, thank you so much for being the advocates and for contacting the churches and the different property owners that would probably want to participate in this. It has taken 14 months to get to the point where we've got a pilot that's been scrutinized to the point of being recommended. And it may well be true that there are people in this community who, when they hear the word homeless or they hear the word camping, that they're not maybe as up on the difference between an illegal occupation of private property against the wishes of the property owner, as opposed to a supervised program where property owners, churches, industrial, whatever, invite people to be on their property, and they're supervised under the, under the program that's been described, where there's been, really one police incident over the course of several years. And I guess I'm hearing that commissioners who are knowledgeable on these differences between illegal, unsupervised camping, occupation of private property or public property, that the public might be, and members of the public might be opposed to one type of camping, if they use that term, although I like camping, and none of this sounds like camping to me. So even the word camping is a bit jarring to me. It might sound like people are backing up a, $150,000 motorhome that they use 5 days a year, and that's camping. Well, that's not my definition of camping. But I guess I'm at a loss as to how do we determine whether the public understands all these differences, and then, assuming they do understand all these differences, what's the best public policy choice for us to pursue? It seems like we're going about this pretty deliberately. I think maybe the advocates might say slowly, but we're going about this very deliberately to try to take the very best of the programs that have a good track record and try to, hone it down to something that might be a good thing for a portion of the unincorporated population of the county. And to me, it doesn't really go far enough, but I think that it's obviously a good idea to do, and I can't see from a financial standpoint how it's bad. It seems like it saves a lot of police resources and jail resources if people aren't being called in to be arrested, police coming to the scene and all that sort of thing. That seems like a very positive component to it. So I guess I'm not sure what would happen if we postponed this. How would we even determine whether people are knowledgeable? Have they not had enough opportunity in 14 months? I'd say that the ones that wanted to know would probably know more. They probably would know more. And I think that the leaders that have spent the time that might have been appalled at the idea of homeless camping on private property, they might have been appalled at that idea in the beginning, and they realized, well, wait a minute, this is a way to cut crime and cut costs and help people and maybe fulfill part of the mission of St. Vincent de Paul himself, the actual saint that we honor in this community and many others around the world. So I hope we get to move on this.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. Further discussion? Then Commissioner Eagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a couple key things. I mean, it was interesting hearing the public comment today because I think it's pretty obvious there is confusion from the citizens. But the question I have is that, first of all, this is a voluntary proposal. Is this correct?
Correct.
And the pilot's for 1 year. Is that correct?
Yes.
I will say this is where I've been trying to get my arms around a little bit more. It's still going to be within an urban area, just located on land that's zoned within the county. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it's, and I mean, that's a challenge in itself because it's clearly going to be located in an urban area, which I get because guess what? That's where the services are. It's going to be really challenging to put something like this out in rural Lane County without services. It would be really challenging. I did hear from the public. I'm hearing from Commissioner Bozovich as well, and I personally don't think. I think he's too hard on himself. I don't think he's failed in this at all. I think the reality is, folks will take a look at this and get in their mind what they think it is, and we have. I think we have an opportunity to maybe showcase something here. And because, we have over in my city, in Springfield, so I want to make sure I say that because what I hear is the county and the city. I actually live in Springfield, so I know you were talking about Eugene. I don't live in Eugene, so, but there are unincorporated areas within the urban growth boundary in Springfield as well. And whether that's something that's a conversation to be had later, if that's something that wants to be established. I heard earlier that this maybe was more of a Eugene Springfield, not as much. I mean, I think clearly we were looking at this area of Eugene being the pilot project and pilot proposal, and with a potential of looking at other communities in Lane County, other cities potentially, whether it be Cottage Grove, whether it be Junction City, or whether the case may be, I don't know. We have been at this for quite a while, and I think there's been a lot of opportunity for folks to come and listen. I got to tell you, I'm very pleased with the work that Chair Farr and Commissioner Bozovich have done on this. It's not easy because this wasn't a Lane County Board sanctioned events that they put on. This was by their own work and as commissioners who represent those districts. And given the testimony I heard, people heard different things. And it was kind of interesting. Even those who live out in the area heard different things. And so, but I think given that, I'm okay. I think I'm comfortable about moving forward with this. And again, because it's pretty small, it's voluntary, and it is a pilot. And frankly, if it doesn't work out, we'll know by the information given. I would also agree that St. Vincent de Paul does do a good job on managing these different, I like how Commissioner Sorensen said it. You're right, it's really not camping. So, but for lack of a better term, they do a good job of managing the different camping sites. So I think I'm okay in looking at this, and it's not because I'm a commissioner who lives in another part that this isn't necessarily going to affect me. The bottom line is we may have districts, but we're responsible for Lane County, and that's how I'm going to look at this. And so I think there's questions. There's no doubt there's questions going in my mind right now, but in order to find out the answers, I think we have to somehow move forward to establish something so we can gather those answers within a year to find out if this will work or not. And if it doesn't work, we will know and we scrap it. I mean, that's really how I look at it. And you won't know until you actually can maybe move forward on it. So Commissioner Bozovich, you're being way too hard on yourself, in my opinion. I think people will hear what they want to hear. And you can only put forth as much information as you possibly can, but I think to me, this is an opportunity to make a decision. And that's kind of where I feel about it. I thought about maybe we should delay this, but I think staff has done a yeoman's job in providing information for us, and will provide any information for those who are willing to volunteer for this as well, and to move forward on establishing and also making sure it's managed correctly. So I appreciate the work, but that's where I'm at. So I'm gonna end up voting yes on this today. Not an easy yes, but I think it's at least, it will give us an opportunity to see if this will actually work within the urban transition area, or if this just makes more sense to be left within the city limits, period. And we won't know until, I think, we establish this. Thank you,
Commissioner Lycan. Further discussion, Commissioner Williams? And a reminder to the board, we have 40 minutes to complete this morning's business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate also Commissioner Bozovich's concern about reaching out to folks. My experience of nearly 20 years in government is that people that want to know something, they find that out. Neighbors talk, programs are aired, newspapers print. There are lots of ways for people to know what's going on. And then there are those, in my experience, that just, well, I don't take the paper, or I don't watch TV, or that. Well, there's a personal responsibility to some extent in this of people to be informed. So I just want to make those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. And I'm going to add a couple of quick comments before we look at the order itself. Commissioner Bozovich, in fact, each of the commissioners have excellent points. I'd like to address Commissioner Bozovich's point that people are expressing a little bit of confusion, perhaps, about what the ordinance actually means, and that greater outreach might address people's questions. I agree with that, and the reason I agree with it is because at the North Eugene High School meeting last week, people came with some of the questions that we heard today regarding sanitation, regarding illegal camping, regarding loitering, etc. And once the pilot program was explained to them, and once the points that are contained in 4.816 were explained to them, their concerns were eased. Almost universally eased, until at the end of the evening in North Eugene, people who came with concerns, at the end of the evening, the people actually applauded the discussion. And a part of that applause was for Keith Heath, who administers the St. Vincent de Paul program, when he was able to answer some of the very specific questions about what does a day in your life look like, Mr. Heath? What do you do? And he explained the very things that he does. And we're looking at 10 campsites with legal camping, and the confusion quite often is confusing legal camping with illegal camping. And in the City of Eugene ordinance, there are a couple of points that really specifically address that, and one of them is that In addition to any other penalties that may be imposed, any campsite used for other nights sleeping in a manner not authorized by this section or other sections of the code shall constitute a nuisance and may be abated as such. So the City of Eugene ordinance actually talks about illegal camping outside of the provisions of the ordinance, and states that it's not tolerated, will be considered as a nuisance, as illegal camping in waterways or other places that illegal camping sometimes exists. So the wording of the ordinance itself, which we would look at as guidelines generally for our camping pilot, which is 1 year or even less than a year. You know, the year may be how long the pilot is, but less than a year based upon the success or lack of success of the pilot. Another requirement is that if a landlord deviates from the rules of the code, they will be cited for deviation from the rules of the code. So you can't have a landlord who agrees to the conditions of the code that we're considering for the pilot, and then changes the conditions with which he or she allows camping on their property. They can't change that because it has to remain inside the code. Otherwise, they're in violation. So many safeguards exist. And as anyone who's worked with the Planning Commission on land use knows that no matter how many people you reach out to, and no matter how long you reach out, there are still going to be people who say, I didn't hear about this. That is the case. And certainly, outreach could have been perhaps a little bit more robust on this, although I personally was in front of 3 different groups talking about it. The most recent was North Eugene High School last week. I talked to the River Road Community, the Riverhood Neighbors Association, and to their executive board, and both were well attended. The executive board is a board of 5 people. The River Road Neighborhood Group was pretty well attended, and they send out pretty robust announcements about that. So concerning people hearing about it, I share that concern, because I know that when people actually do hear about it, in most cases, the other night in North Eugene High School, people applauded the program, applauded Mr. Heath, applauded what St. Vincent de Paul does to administer the program. So like Commissioner Lycan, I'm prepared to move forward with it. However, we do need to take a look at what of the motion that is before us. So the motion is in the matter of establishing a pilot program for overnight homeless camping parking in the urban transition zone within the urban growth boundary in the River Road Santa Clara area. The motion itself does not refer to any code language. So can you discuss that a little bit, Mr. Mokrahajski, how the motion addresses the actual language of the code that would be enforced during the pilot program?
Well, first of all, just a clarification. I didn't hear a motion.
We don't have a motion yet. There's a suggested
So there's a
motion.
draft order in front of you.
Yes.
You take the.
Sure. Chair Farr, I know there was discussion early on about whether we would need lane code language in an ordinance or not, and County Council weighed in and recommended against adopting lane code language. So this doesn't have actual code language. What we will do is embed the discussion that we've had here in a contract with St. Vincent de Paul, and pass along those restrictions that we've talked about, the types of properties that will be included and those other elements. So there's not specific code language here.
Thank you. That's precisely what I wanted to hear. So the direction that the board would give you by passing Order 1711-2808 would be a direction to move forward and establish language by which the pilot program would be operated.
Correct.
And it would include the discussion that we've had today, restricting it from vacant lots, backyards, driveways, et cetera.
Absolutely. That will be included in our contract with St. Vincent de Paul.
And that would be in the contract with St. Vincent de Paul.
Or that selection process, I think, hasn't been completed yet. Whoever the nonprofit is who would manage that program, and then we'll embed those restrictions in the arrangement with them, since they'll be supervising the program.
And is it safe to presume then that Eugene Code 4.816 is roughly the outline of whatever language, or the existing contract, shall we say, with St. Vincent de Paul, which is wrapped around 4.816, would roughly be the language of our contract?
And Chair Farr, Commissioners, I think we've talked today about in which ways our program would differ from what the City of Eugene has and in which ways it would be similar. So yes, all of that would be passed through.
Perfect. Wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. Then to the board, we have before us Order 17112808, which provides direction to the board, to the staff from the board to establish a pilot program for overnight homeless camping. To the board, do I have a motion? Commissioner Eagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the board order that we have today is sufficient.
Yes, Chair Farr, Commissioner Eagan, that is our understanding from County Council, that this is sufficient to move forward with this pilot project.
Because you were almost confusing me there for a second and what I was hearing the back and forth, but this is sufficient because it's establishing.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 17-11-2808 in the matter of establishing a pilot program for overnight homeless camping parking in the urban transition zone within the urban growth boundary in the River Road, Santa Clara area.
We have a motion. Do I have a second? Moved by Commissioner Eagan, seconded by Commissioner Sorensen. Discussion to the motion. I see no discussion to the motion. I will call for the vote on Order 17-11-2808. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Passes 4-1 with Commissioner Vozovich, no. Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. Thank you, Ms. Manella, and thank you for the work that all of staff has done for decades to get us to this tiny little judgment point. Thank you. Then we'll move forward with our with the balance of the morning agenda. Mr. Mokrahajski, we have next on our agenda Order 17-11-28-10. Excuse me, 17-11-2809, which is the 2017-19 Lane County Grant and Aid Budget and Community Corrections Plan. Subsequent to that, we'll have the dash 10 discussion, which is the City of Florence. The Revision Florence project. So, Ms. Mokrahajski, are we prepared to move forward with the grant and aid budget item?
Mr. Chair, I know Mr. Solomon and Ms. Sowards are upstairs, and we do have the City of Florence team here. I know the board's trying to get through all of this in 30 minutes, so if you'd like to take up the Revision Florence item, I think we're prepared to do that. And I know that Mr. Solomon and Ms. Sowards are patiently waiting, and they understand that we have a contingent here from Florence who traveled a long ways to be here this morning. So
thank you.
If you want to take up 9C at this point, we can do that.
So without objection from the board, we'll move forward to item 9C on our agenda. I see no objection. Didn't look very hard, but I don't see any. Order 17-11-28-10 in the matter of approving the contribution of $200,000 per year for 6 years, a total of $1.2 million in county transient room tax funds for the Revision Florence project. Ms. Mokrahajski, today we have, please introduce your panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Christine Moody, obviously our budget manager, Councilor Green from the City of Florence, and City Manager Aaron Reynolds from Florence as well. And the city officials are here. They had an opportunity to speak with them this morning. They very much appreciate the lengthy agenda and the timeliness with which you need to get through this morning. And so they're here for questions that you may have of them. And I'm going to turn it over to Christine to walk through the staff report that we have for you, and we'll take questions from the board after that.
Thank you, Ms. Margaret.
Thank you, Chair Farr. Good morning, Commissioners. So the memo before you lays out a little bit of the history of the request from City of Florence for their Revision Florence project. They came to the county with a request of $2 million looking at various sources of funds. As you will remember, you had a presentation from them most recently on November 7th, where at that time, county staff also went through some of the funding sources for you. So the memo and order in front of you today focus on the transient room tax. There was some talk at the last meeting about the road fund, the transportation funding, and the priorities that the board has already set for that funding. So that is not included in the order as presented, but we are open to any questions on that. On the transient room tax, those funds are managed up in county administration. I help with those funds, the capital fund specifically, and I can tell you that the $200,000 over 6 years is something that fund can afford. It does tie up that money, as we mentioned, for the 6-year period, so you wouldn't have anything to give to another organization that might come forward, so we want to make you aware of that. But with that, I'll just cover that and then open for questions.
Thank you. And at this point in time, Councillor Green, Aaron, if you have a brief comment, we would entertain that at this point in time.
The only thing I want to add, and I know you've already seen letters of support from the community, they particularly identified the better value of what's going to happen with this change in 101. And the primary thing they talk about are the things that we are really using the TRT money for: the bicycle paths, the sidewalks, the beautiful plaza areas, the things that are really betterment for tourism and attract people. So, and I was very pleased to read the letters that I saw. So.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything further? Then we have before us Order 171128-10. Mr. Mokrzycki.
Just a couple of additional comments. As Councilor Green mentioned, you have a number of support letters that were submitted from various agencies. Those have all been posted online. We did receive, and Franny Brindle from ODOT is here in the back. We did receive a letter from ODOT, and the board has that as well. So all of that is available for you. Obviously, we've had a lot of discussions with the board and the City of Florence over several months, and we just want to credit the city officials, the city council, the mayor, and city staff, the Urban Renewal Agency, and their community for all of the work that they've done to get to this point. I think that, we have 12 cities in Lane County, and they all have needs and interests in pursuing redevelopment opportunities and economic development in their areas. Florence really has done, I think, a phenomenal job of working collaboratively with various agencies, including ODOT, to identify an opportunity to look at an infrastructure project and expand that in a way that really enhances the core of the community. So that's why Lane County has worked to partner with the city on this, and we're really pleased to recommend to the board from a staff perspective the use of some of our limited transit room taxes for this purpose.
Thank you, Ms. Mokrzycki, and Ms. Brindle, thank you for being here for the discussion today. Then we'll move forward. We have before us Order 171128-10. Commissioner Bozovich.
So I'd like to move approval of Order 171128-10 in the matter of approving $200,000 per year for 6 years of transient room tax funding for the Revision Florence project.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozovich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Bozovich.
Just real quick, I want to say that this is a really exciting project, and we talked about it in past meetings, so I don't want to belabor this too long, but this is going to change the gateway into Lane County on the coast. Right now, as you drive north or south on Highway 101, Florence is basically the gateway to Lane County, and what you see in that stretch from the Siuslaw River around to where 126 leaves the city is really the first impressions a lot of people have of Lane County. They don't really kind of realize they're in the county yet till they get to that point. And this is going to change that impression. And hopefully it'll get a few more people to stop and spend a few more dollars, maybe stay the night the next time they're in town. And I just really appreciate the work that's gone in behind us. It was great to see support from Harlan and a whole wide spectrum of people from the business and arts community in Florence. And just what a collaborative project between the Urban Renewal Agency, the City of Florence, and ODOT, and now the county, to try and bring this to fruition and really change that gateway into Lane County.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Further discussion? Well, I'm just going to add that I feel really selfish in this because it's not your city, it's my city. In fact, folks from the Valley visit Florence very, very frequently. I was there no less than a dozen times throughout the summer, enjoying your city, enjoying your beaches, enjoying your bayfront, enjoying your restaurants, enjoying your state park, enjoying all of the things, all the amenities that our great coastal city, our great Lane County coastal city has. So I'm excited to move forward with this. I see no further discussion. We have before us. I beg your pardon, Commissioner Sorensen.
I just wanted to mention that I was in Florence last Wednesday, and I was explaining to my family members of numerous generations how this is going to look, and instead of just taking a straight right turn to the crab salad at Driftwood Shores. I made a left and went under the bridge and came up the other side and head through just to look at the area. And I just want to say that, you know, I'm not as frequent a visitor to Florence as, say, the commissioner that represents that area, but I really think this is something good for the whole county, and I'm really glad to see all the collaboration that's gone into this. And there are, you know, literally thousands, if not tens of thousands of visitors that come through there, and they're not all from out of state. In fact, I think a lot of the people that come are actually from the valley, looking for that beautiful coastline, looking for those beautiful shops and experiences that they can get in Florence. So I just want to say it is a county-wide effort.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen. Further discussion? I see none. Then we have before us Order 17-11-280-10. I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimous. Please pass along the thanks to Mayor Henry for his and the entire.
Thank you. And he apologizes for his absence today. It was unavoidable, and thank you for your support. And we will make sure you're invited for a ribbon cutting. Or a drive-through, I don't know, something.
I'll see you on the Bayfront.
Right.
Thank you so much for working with us on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Ms. Smoker-Ice, I'm going to take a step backward to county council announcements. I believe we have 0 county council announcements, and then county administration announcements. If you have any, can those be delayed until after the item 9B? Then we'll move to item 9B, which is Order 17-11-2809. In the matter of approving the 2017-19 Lane County Grant in Aid Budget and Community Corrections Plan, delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the intergovernmental agreement and contracts, and delegating authority to the staff of Public Safety Coordinating Council to submit the Community Corrections Plan and signed IGA to Oregon Department of Corrections. Would you like me to say that again? Then Ms. Smoker-Heisky, please.
And I'll turn it over to Mr. Solomon and Ms. Sowers, but just to say, and I know Commissioner Bozevich, who serves as the board's representative on the Public Safety Coordinating Council, will likely have comments, but really appreciate the work that happened this year from all of our public safety partners, and really led by Paul Solomon, the chair of the PSCC, as well as Judge Vogt, and the DA and the sheriff as part of the budget committee. It really was a collaborative process. We worked through some issues and came out, and I think you're going to hear from Paul the results of all that work. But I hope that's the theme that the board takes from this, is the incredible amount of collaboration that's happening between our public safety agencies and the community to find the best way to spend limited state resources to have the most impact on making our community safe and healthy.
Thank you, Steve. Chair Farr, Commissioners, thank you for having us this afternoon. I guess it's almost afternoon. I actually thought about bringing party hats today, in part because this is such a phenomenal budget that we have to bring before you. And one of the things that I want to do is provide a little context and a little history. We have been through much more difficult times, and I'll talk a little bit about that and where we are today. But to give you a little context, back in August, the PSCC adopted the 17-19 budgets for the grant and aid funding and the JRGP, the Justice Reinvestment Grant Program, per recommendations from the Budget Committee. However, the Budget Committee had also had the task of refining the Community Corrections Plan, so that's why we weren't able to submit these both concurrently. On September 21st of this year, the Budget Committee presented the grant and aid budget and the CCA plan to the full PSCC for approval. The budget and plan were unanimously adopted by the PSCC for action by the board. And I'm really thrilled to present what I believe is a robust budget that includes numerous funding increases to stabilize and enhance our public safety system. But before we get into the details, I really would, echoing on Steve's comments, I would like to acknowledge the work of the Budget Committee, chaired by Chief Criminal Judge Deb Vogt, and the membership there included myself, Captain Buchwald, Greg Rickoff, and Commissioner Bozevich. And we had to meet numerous times. This was a very complicated budget, in part because we were working with multiple funding streams, the Justice Reinvestment Grant Program money, the grant and aid dollars and the supplemental funding that came out of this year's House Bill 3078, which we didn't know whether we were going to receive. So we had to put together multiple budget scenarios. We had to meet numerous times, and I just have a great debt of gratitude, especially to Judge Vogt and to Commissioner Bozovich for their time and efforts in working through the issues to get us to where we are today. The budget, I also would be remiss if I didn't mention Ms. Sowards, who has been the linchpin in putting together these budgets. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Susan's efforts, but clearly I would not be here talking today if she had not put together this detailed agenda packet. The current budget reflects a substantial increase over past biennia. The decreases in funding over the past 4-6 years have been pretty substantial. If we go back to the 11-13 biennium, we received roughly 10% of the state's allocation of grant and aid funding. That reduced to 9% in 13-15 and 8% in 15-17. So those 1 percentage point reductions, when you're talking about an allocation of a couple $100 million, is significant. And we have struggled to maintain vital public safety services with those cuts. And we've done, I think, an admirable job using grant dollars and really leveraging what resources are available. But we've had a bare bones budget for a number of years with our grant and aid funding. Coincidentally, the public safety levy passed, the trend started to shift, and part of this came about as a result of prosecution patterns. As you all are probably quite aware, these numbers are predicated on an annual snapshot that the state does twice over the biennia to get an average of the number of people on felony supervision, and that dictates what our allocation is. As a result of reduced prosecutions on drug and property crimes in past years, we saw substantial reductions. With the leadership and restored positions in the DA's office, we've seen a healthy uptick. And what I would say is we're not just locking people up anymore. Now we have services where we can provide interventions for people. We're not on this merry-go-round where people are cited and released, and we wait until they have multiple property crimes amassed, and then we send them to prison. We now are providing interventions the day people enter our system, and that's a substantial change and would not have occurred without the additional funding. So ultimately, our increase this biennia of 9.3% over the past biennia of 8.26% was larger than any other county in the state. So I'm really proud of our efforts, and I think we have a huge debt of gratitude to our District Attorney, Patty Perlow, for her efforts in their office, and the team, the Sheriff's Office, everybody, to really come together, use what resources we have, and help build back the base that really is responsible for funding the grant and aid dollars that come to the county. The 1.1% increase resulted in an additional $2.2 million. And I'd like to take a moment to discuss some of the programs that are funded under the current budget and what they mean to our system. So some of the programs that are funded are programs that were sustained, that we were either funding in previous biennia or had been grant funded, and we were looking for ways to sustain because we recognize the value of these programs. One of them is the RLAN program that is operated at the Sheriff's Office in the Community Corrections Center. It's a partnership between the Oregon Department of Corrections, sponsors, and the Sheriff's Office, where we are taking people who are Lane County residents who would be coming back to Lane County 2 months prior to their projected release date, providing intensive services for them at the work release center, and then at the end of the 2 months, transitioning them to sponsors, giving them a full 2 months of service that they wouldn't have got had they been released directly from prison. This has been a very successful program. Since we started it, we've only had one person recidivate. So I think that this has been a good use of our resources, and it's also helping the state save dollars. And I also have the hope and belief that at some point the state will pick up the tab for this particular program in the future. The other thing that came about as a result of this program, and this goes directly to the leadership of Captain Dan Buchwald in the Sheriff's Office, is getting PRIA certification, which was no small task. So Lane County, I believe, was the first or second county in the state to receive PRIA certification. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's the Prison Rape Elimination Act. And in order for DOC to contract with us, they wanted to make sure that Lane County was PRIA certified. So we had to go through an audit. They had to make some changes. And ultimately, it wasn't a whole lot that needed to be changed, but it was really Dan's leadership that made this happen and allowed us to sustain this funding source through DOC, which is now being picked up by the county. Cognitive behavioral therapy in the jail. Sponsors in the Lane County Sheriff's Office have been providing CBT for people who are in custody in the Lane County Jail. Since we started 2 years ago, we've served over 1,000 men and women. So people aren't just being held in custody, sitting, waiting while they have pending charges or serving their sentences. They're now receiving services that are designed to address criminogenic risk factors and reduce the likelihood of them reoffending. So with both of those programs, again, I know Captain Buchwald is retiring, but I cannot say enough about his leadership in enhancing and improving the quality of services in the jail. I'd now like to talk for a moment about the increased funding in the budget for the PSCC staffing. Over the past 2 years, Ms. Sowards, in her role as public safety planner, has successfully written over $7 million in competitive public safety related grants. I don't know any other investment that we could make as a county that has a better return. $7 million in grant funding that has come to this county as a direct result of Susan's efforts in partnership with others. So in recognition of the fact that for many years the PSCC has operated on a very, very thin budget that was made up by $18,000 from Lane County, $18,000 from the Sheriff's Office, and $18,000 from the City of Eugene. We have recognized the need over the past couple of years to enhance PSCC staffing funding. And you'll see that there's more funding in this budget for the PSCC. And for those of you who are into investing, I think this is a better bet than Bitcoin. I mean, I don't know what her salary is, but $7 million on, whatever the FTE that's dedicated is a good investment. Additionally, we have sustained and increased staffing positions at the Oaks at 14th, the HACSA, PNP, and Sponsors Project for permanent supported housing. We've sustained funding for sanction beds in the jail, and we've increased funding for parole and probation. A couple of new programs that we're bringing online are gender-specific POs in a substation for females so that the women are not having to report to PNP downtown at the main office where it becomes something of a dating service. And I think this is something that Director Dumeyer has recognized for a while, that mixing these populations, that there's a lot of unintended consequences that come from mixing both low and high risk offenders as well as men and women. So separating the populations is a big deal, and it's something that we have funded in the form of a new substation, 2 full-time POs, and a supervisor. And we also set aside funding for relocation efforts for parole and probation. Currently, they are housed in the upstairs of the CCC at the Sheriff's Office. They're bursting at the seams. So we were able to use some grant and aid funding to pay for relocation efforts and also to remodel that space when they leave so it can be used for the Sheriff's Office for CCC beds. So with that, those are just some of the highlights. I'll let Susan walk us through any additional things that I missed or need to be pointed out, and we'll entertain any questions you have when she's done.
I think you hit most of it, Paul. The level of collaboration definitely is the piece that I've watched grow. I've been with PSCC since pretty much within 6 months of when the board began to appoint the PSCC. I've been there as staff all but 6 months of that period. And it's been amazing to see the level of collaboration right now and to see us come out of, times of hunger, basically, when people were like this, because it was just everybody was desperate around the table, to being able to really say, what do we really want this system to look like? What do we really want to happen differently in Lane County? And being able to have these resources to make that happen and people able to agree on that. So it's my pleasure. It's the only reason I'm still doing this stuff when I'm retired. And the other thing I want to say is using this money to sustain projects that started with grants as their grant writer, to be able to say in another grant that I'm writing, oh, and we sustained the last 5 projects we had. It's just like this wonderful rolling ball that keeps going forward. So it's a very good policy, I think, on the county's part to say this is important. The stuff that's working, not the stuff that isn't, but the stuff that's working, that you've used federal funds to pilot, and now we're able to use these state funds to carry it forward. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Chair, for our commissioners, one other thing to add, and that is one of the things that the PSCC is committed to and is embedded in this budget is in evaluating the effectiveness of the interventions that we are doing. So right now, Lane County is involved in 2 randomized control trials, and we're beginning to get a lot of solid data from the Criminal Justice Commission, the Department of Corrections, as we begin to run recidivism cohort data on specific projects. And what we're seeing is our investments are paying off. We are seeing substantial reductions in recidivism on the back end. We are seeing substantial reductions in our use of prison beds on the front end. So we are making a difference, and we hope to be coming back to this body in the near future with really gold standard evidence of those efforts in the form of RCTs that will be completed in the next year or 2.
Thank you, Ms. Solomon. And before I hand the floor to Commissioner Bozovich, who is our delegate to PSCC and has been for years, I just wanted to mention that the other day I had a chance to sit beside Ms. Sowards in the Association of Oregon Counties. The entire room was filled with people from around the state, and the amount of respect and deference that was provided toward you, Ms. Sowards, in that room, it really touched me deeply, because there were people who clearly look at you, the program that we have in Lane County and the work that's being done here as, Mr. Solomon, you said, the gold standard. That's what I viewed in that room that day. So, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. And I just want to, echo the thanks to Susan and the staff there at LCOG that helped us get over the finish line with all these grants. I mean, whether it's the federal grants we've applied for to getting through this whole grant and aid process. It's been a trial. What people may not realize is it started with a lot of hiccups. We were kind of under the microscope from the Criminal Justice Commission at the beginning of this process, and they were asking for in-depth explanations and and kind of in response to that, we overwrote the plan, the first draft, sort of, and actually were told, no, we really don't want that information in the plan. We had to go back and rewrite it. But as part of that, I also, just want to note the work that some of the departments had to do to go back and kind of prove our past use of funds has been accurate. There was an incredible effort by the Sheriff's Department to do a bunch of forensic accounting as part of this, and just the give and take in this whole process to getting to a final community corrections plan. What you see today is months and months worth of background accounting work, cooperation, rewriting, writing over again, a language changes, people, having to move aside and let other people be authors, and the whole, it's a plan that's a systems plan. And when you get into that, you got to take a team and put them together and kind of to meld that team. And at the start of this, it may not have been working really well, but by the end of this process, I think we've really changed that dynamic and have a great team. Not that we didn't have a good team to start with, because one of the things that's been great at being, part of the PSCC, and I'm also co-chair of AOC's Public Safety Committee, which also ends up putting me on the NACO's Public Safety and Criminal Justice Committee, is getting to kind of compare us with other counties and listening to their programs and their functionalities. And there are few counties in this state that can rival what we're doing here locally when it comes to restorative justice and cooperation across our departments. And we are well beyond the rest of the nation. Most of the things I attended about stepping up back at NACO last legislative conference in March, we could have been teaching all that out of Lane County. I felt like we already do that. Oh, we do that too. Yeah, we do that. It was incredible just, thinking about the work we're doing here. And it's such a cooperative effort, whether it's the DA's change in how they were doing their prosecutions so we could get back that 1%, which totally changed our ability to fund and to continue funding some of these federal grant programs. If we had gone the other direction, I don't know what we would have done with some of our programs. Our ability to be sensible in our requests, as I sat on the Criminal Justice Commission's Grant Review Committee, which also gave me an insight into what other counties are doing, led to us being the only county that was fully funded from that supplemental funds because we didn't get greedy. And we could also show we're continuing a program that has been really successful, and we were only asking for exactly what the legislator said those funds were for, which was positions in that actual program, which is this, program to try and divert folks out of prison that are, property crime offenders, drug and property crime offenders. Because we had that, experience under the federal 416 grant, we've just kind of swept right in there and got fully funded. No other county did that. Everybody else got some kind of haircut in their funding under that supplemental. So, just time and time again, I just see how outstanding the process has been for Lane County. And I got to stop talking mostly because we've got something we have to move to as the board. So with that, if with the indulgence of the board, I'd like to move approval of 1711-2809 in approving the Community Corrections Plan and delegating authority to the county administrator execute the intergovernmental agreement and contracts, and delegating authority to the staff of the Public Safety and Coordinating Council to submit the Community Corrections Plan and signed IGA to the Oregon Department of Corrections.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozovich, seconded by Commissioner Lycan. Discussion to the motion? None from me other than thank you. And Ms. Solomon, can you report on what is your salary from the county for your work on this?
Vow of poverty.
Vow of poverty.
Do it out of the goodness of my heart.
Well, thank you very much for the goodness of your heart, because as Commissioner Bozovich said, there are no place that I know of in the nation that has the same level of depth of service for the people that we are serving in the program. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we will move the Commissioner's business and agenda items to the afternoon. We have no reason for executive session. Our executive session will also follow this afternoon. So at this point, until 1:30 p.m. here in Harris Hall, we are recessed.